Hi guys, and welcome to Bedtime History Relaxing. Tonight we step quietly into an English royal palace in the year 1598, long before electric lights, refrigerators, stainless steel counters, or anyone shouting that the delivery driver has forgotten the garlic sauce. It is still dark outside, but beneath the royal apartments the kitchens are already awake. You hear logs cracking in enormous hearths, iron spits scrape against their supports. Somewhere in the half-light, a knife strikes a wooden board again and again. The air carries smoke, damp stone, hot fat, onions, stale ale, and yesterday's ashes. And tonight, you're not dining with Queen Elizabeth II, you're cooking for her, which sounds prestigious until you realise that your workplace contains open flames, boiling cauldrons, sharp blades, exhausted servants, unpredictable supplies, and several hundred hungry people who believe dinner appearing late is somehow your personal moral failure. You probably won't survive this with your modern work-life balance intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle into bed, tell me where in the world you're listening from and what the local time is where you are. Perhaps it is midnight in London, early morning in Sydney, or a very questionable hour somewhere you definitely intended to be asleep already. Now, dim the lights and step through the kitchen doorway. The first sensation is heat. Not comfortable warmth, not the pleasant heat of an oven opened for a few seconds. This is the steady, physical pressure of several large fires burning inside stone hearths, each one fed constantly with split wood. Your eyes begin watering almost immediately. The room is broad, but it does not feel spacious. Tables, tubs, baskets, barrels, hooks, spits, chopping blocks, pots, ladles, and people fill every useful corner. Shadows jump across the walls whenever flames shift. You have arrived before sunrise because a royal household does not simply wake up and then decide what it wants for breakfast. Preparation begins hours earlier in Elizabethan England. The monarch travels with and maintains an enormous household of officers, servants, specialists, guards, attendants, and courtiers. Feeding the Queen therefore means feeding an institution, not merely one famously dressed woman sitting politely at a table. The kitchen itself belongs to a larger system of household departments. Responsibilities are divided carefully. Certain servants handle bread, others manage wine or ale. Different officers oversee meat, poultry, pastry, spices, fuel, storage, and serving. You may call yourself a royal cook when boasting to someone at an alehouse, but inside the palace your place is much more precise. Hierarchy is everywhere, even among kitchen workers. A senior officer can order you to change a preparation without touching a spoon himself. Experienced cooks command younger assistants. Boys carry wood, turn spits, fetch water, scrub equipment, and perform the endless small jobs without which the grand machinery simply stops. You quickly learn that standing still attracts attention, so you move. A basket of onions waits beside a table. You lift one and feel its papery skin against your fingers. Nearby, someone is trimming meat by candlelight. Another servant tips water into a broad vessel with a hollow splash. The floor is not beautifully tiled for your convenience. It is practical, hard, stained, damp in places, and constantly threatened by scraps, grease, ash, and spilled liquid. Footing matters. One careless step while carrying a hot pot can transform a normal morning into a memorable one. There are no neat digital temperature controls. Fire is your instrument. You learn to judge it by sight, sound, distance, and experience. A fierce flame may be useful beneath a large cauldron. A bed of glowing embers may suit slower cooking. Meat roasting before a hearth must be moved closer or farther depending on the heat. You begin to appreciate how much knowledge lives inside gestures that no one bothers to write down. A cook glances at a roast and knows it needs turning. Someone presses dough and knows whether it has the right consistency. Another servant smells a pot before deciding it needs more spice. The royal kitchen depends upon trained senses, and those senses are already working before dawn. One slightly peculiar detail of Tudor kitchen life concerns the turning of roasting spits. Large joints may require hours of steady rotation, and this monotonous task can fall to servants known as turnspits. In later centuries, specially bred turnspit dogs are famously used to power small wheels connected to roasting mechanisms, although exactly how widely such devices belong in elite Elizabethan kitchens remains uncertain. For you this morning, there is no convenient canine colleague volunteering for the shift. There is simply a spit, a fire, and someone unfortunate enough to keep it moving. The smell of roasting meat begins to deepen. Fat drops towards the hearth and hisses. You wipe your forehead with the back of your wrist. Although morning has barely begun, above you, in far more comfortable rooms, the Queen's household slowly stirs. Elizabeth is 65 years old in 1598, an extraordinary age for a reigning monarch by the standards of her world. She has ruled England for 4 decades, and her public image has become an elaborate performance of authority, magnificence, chastity, and royal ceremony. But down here, political symbolism has a much more immediate form. Someone needs more firewood. A servant hurries past carrying a basket. Another appears at the doorway with instructions. You hear the words repeated because misunderstanding an order is risky. Food at court is tied to rank, schedule, ceremony, and expectation. The Queen's needs come first, but the operation extends far beyond her personal plate. Historians continue to question exactly how consistently surviving household ordinances reflect everyday practice, because official rules can describe how a royal household is supposed to operate rather than every improvised decision made during an actual chaotic morning. And chaos, you suspect, is considerably older than bureaucracy. A younger servant nearly collides with you while carrying kindling. He mutters an apology and disappears toward the hearth. No one laughs. There is too much to do. You begin chopping. The knife is heavier than many modern kitchen knives, and the wooden surface beneath it is deeply marked by years of work. Each downward movement makes a dull, reassuring sound. Cut, gather, move. Cut again. Soon your breathing falls into the rhythm. This is how the palace morning reveals itself, not through trumpets or proclamations, but through repetition. Wood arrives, water heats, ingredients are counted, fires are watched. Orders move downward through ranks of servants, and somewhere beyond the smoky windows, the first pale suggestion of daylight finally reaches the sky. You hardly notice it. Your day has already been underway for hours. Before long, you will have to understand exactly who receives what, why the Queen's table is different from every other table, and how something as ordinary as a loaf of bread can reveal the rigid architecture of Tudor society. For now, though, another log drops onto the fire, sparks rise into the smoky air, someone calls for your attention, and you turn back toward the heat. The heat follows you as you move deeper into the morning routine, but now another force begins to make itself felt just as strongly. Rank. You cannot see it hanging in the air like smoke, yet it shapes almost everything around you. Who receives the finest bread? Who is served first? Who drinks wine instead of ordinary ale? Who gets the best cuts of meat? Who's allowed to enter certain rooms? Who carries a dish? Who touches the Queen's food? And, just as importantly, who absolutely does not? You are beginning to understand that cooking for Elizabeth the Rum is not simply about making food taste good. It is about placing every ingredient inside a carefully ordered world. A royal household in 1598 is a social machine. At the top stands the Queen herself. Below her comes a dense arrangement of noble courtiers, household officers, gentlemen, attendants, guards, clerks, chaplains, musicians, servants, labourers, and specialists. Each person exists somewhere in a hierarchy that feels almost architectural. Food helps make that hierarchy visible. You notice it first in the bread. Bread seems simple enough: flour, water, yeast, salt, heat. But at court, even a loaf can carry status. The whitest and most finely sifted wheat bread is associated with wealth and high rank because producing it requires better grain and more processing. Darker, rougher breads belong farther down the social ladder, so when baskets are prepared for different tables, no one casually tosses whatever loaf happens to be nearest. The distinctions matter. The Queen's table demands the best. You look at a pale loaf resting on a board and suddenly understand that even its colour is political. The same principle applies to meat. Not every person in the palace receives the same portions or the same quality. Household regulations can assign allowances according to office and status. Certain officers are entitled to particular amounts of bread, drink, fuel, candles, or food as part of their position. This means the kitchen is not simply preparing meals. It is processing entitlement. Someone checks quantities, someone else keeps records. Orders are passed, portions are separated. A mistake can become more than an inconvenience because giving one person what properly belongs to another can be interpreted as disorder, favoritism, waste, or incompetence. You find yourself looking at the tables differently now. Each pile of food has a destination, each destination has a rank, and each rank has expectations. The royal table is the most sensitive of all. Elizabeth's meals are surrounded by ceremony. Her food does not travel directly from a greasy kitchen table to her hand. It passes through stages of preparation, inspection, carrying, presentation, and service. This distance is deliberate. A monarch must appear elevated above ordinary household life. Even eating becomes part of performance. You may spend hours sweating over a sauce that Elizabeth herself barely touches. Yet the dish still matters because royal magnificence is not measured only by appetite. It is measured by abundance, by order, by presentation, by the ability of the household to produce more than an ordinary person could possibly require. That excess tells everyone watching that the crown possesses resources. You wipe your hands and turn toward another task. Nearby, an officer is speaking sharply to a servant who's placed something in the wrong position. The correction seems almost absurdly serious. Then you remember where you are. A palace is built from details. One badly arranged tray will not destroy the monarchy, of course, but the culture around you assumes that proper order in small things reflects proper order in larger ones. Elizabethan society is deeply conscious of degree and precedence. People know who outranks whom. They know who walks first, who sits closer, who receives greater courtesy, and meals offer endless opportunities to display those differences. You're somewhere inside this structure, but not near the summit. That becomes obvious whenever a senior household officer enters. Conversation changes, bodies straighten, instructions are acknowledged immediately. A skilled cook can possess valuable expertise, but expertise does not erase rank. You may know more about roasting a capon than half the gentlemen upstairs, but you're not therefore invited to advise them on foreign policy, probably for the best. Foreign policy is stressful enough without anyone asking whether the French ambassador needs more cinnamon. Still, your position is not meaningless. Royal kitchens require trained people. Cooking on this scale demands organization, timing, physical endurance, and judgment. Large joints must be roasted correctly. Sauces must balance sweetness, sourness, spice, and richness. Pastry must hold its form. Fish must be handled carefully. Multiple dishes have to arrive in a useful order rather than appearing whenever someone happens to finish them. The work rewards experience. An apprentice watches older hands. A junior worker learns where tools belong. You begin to recognize who can be trusted with delicate tasks and who is mainly trusted not to drop the firewood. One curious feature of great households is that food service creates opportunities for leftovers, fragments, and perquisites. Bones, scraps, used candles, old kitchen materials, or portions of food can carry value in many early modern households. Servants may benefit from customary rights to certain remnants of consumption, although exactly who receives what varies according to institution and period. Nothing valuable is simply rubbish in the modern sense. Fat can be useful, bones can be useful, ash can be useful. Even leftover food can circulate through layers of the household. You begin to see the kitchen as a place where wealth flows downward in small streams. The Queen receives magnificence, senior officers receive privilege, lower servants survive partly through wages, allowances, meals, and customary benefits. Waste exists, certainly, but reuse is woven into daily life. At the same time, suspicion surrounds royal food. Monarchs live in a world where poisoning is an imaginable danger. Popular stories often exaggerate the presence of official food tasters dramatically sampling every plate, and the historical reality is more complicated than the familiar theatrical image of someone taking one brave bite before the Queen eats. Food can be examined and handled according to strict protocols, but historians still disagree about how consistently specialized tasting practices functioned in Elizabeth's household compared with later legends about royal poison prevention. What is certain is that access matters. You do not simply wander into the Queen's presence carrying a steaming pie because you feel proud of it. There are controlled routes, servants have defined roles, dishes move through designated hands. This system protects both royal dignity and physical security. You begin preparing another mixture while someone beside you grinds spices. The stone mortar produces a low, repetitive scraping sound. Cloves, perhaps mace, perhaps pepper. The aroma rises sharply above the smell of smoke. Spices themselves carry status. England does not grow peppercorns or cloves in a kitchen garden behind the palace. Such goods arrive through long commercial networks linking Europe with distant regions of Asia and beyond. Their expense makes them useful signals of wealth, yet by the late 16th century, spices are not mysterious magical substances reserved for one or two royal dishes. Wealthy households use them extensively. The old idea that people simply pour spices over rotten meat to hide decay does not fit the economics very well. If you can afford generous quantities of imported spice, you can probably afford reasonably fresh meat too. You smile slightly at that. Apparently humans centuries from now will imagine you eating spoiled beef under a mountain of cinnamon. You would like to object. You are too busy. A servant calls out numbers while provisions are moved. You hear names of offices and destinations. The palace is awake now. Footsteps multiply in corridors. Doors open and close. Messages arrive more frequently. The kitchen becomes louder without anyone consciously deciding that it should. And still the hierarchy controls the apparent chaos. A dish for the Queen cannot casually become a dish for a lesser table. A servant cannot simply claim a superior portion because he feels especially hungry. A cook cannot decide that ceremony is unnecessary today. You work within expectations that have existed long before you entered the room. One established reality of Tudor royal government is that the household is not separated neatly from politics. Access to the monarch can mean influence. Household offices can carry prestige and patronage. The court is both residence and political arena, so even the people who organize meals stand closer to power than their greasy sleeves might suggest. Not equal to power, but close enough to feel its heat. You glance toward the doorway. Beyond it lies a chain of rooms leading gradually away from smoke and labour toward polished service. Decorated chambers, guarded access, and eventually the Queen. The distance is not very great in steps. Socially, it is enormous. Your job is to help bridge it. You transform raw provisions into food suitable for royalty. Other servants transform your work into ceremony. And by the time a dish reaches Elizabeth, much of the rough labour behind it has disappeared from view. No smoke, no shouting, no servant dragging wood, no slippery floor, only silver, linen, order, and abundance. That illusion is part of your work too. You look again at the pale bread, the spices, the carefully divided portions. Soon you will need to understand where all these things come from, because a palace cannot feed itself. Every loaf begins in a field. Every fish begins in water. Every imported spice has crossed extraordinary distances, and somewhere beyond the kitchen doors, carts and suppliers are already bringing the next wave of ingredients toward you. The next arrivals announce themselves before you see them. Wheels grind across the yard outside. Hooves strike stone. A man shouts at someone to move a barrel. Another voice answers with the weary irritation of a person who has been awake since long before sunrise and has already had enough of everyone. You step toward the service entrance just as a cart appears beyond the doorway. This is where the royal kitchen begins to reveal the geography of England, and, in a quieter way, the geography of the wider world. The palace may look self-contained from inside, with its chambers, courtyards, offices, guards, kitchens, and storerooms. But it depends constantly on things arriving from elsewhere. Grain, meat, fish, butter, cheese, eggs, fruit, vegetables, wine, spices, sugar, firewood, charcoal, salt. The list is enormous, and none of it simply materializes because the Queen is hungry. Someone must grow it, catch it, raise it, transport it, purchase it, inspect it, record it, carry it inside, and then, eventually, hand it to you. A servant rolls a barrel past. The wooden staves are darkened by use, held together by hoops. Another man carries a basket covered with cloth. When the covering's pulled back, you see eggs packed carefully against one another. Not one egg comes with a little printed date on the shell. You're expected to judge freshness by experience. That is becoming a recurring theme. The royal household draws provisions from a mixture of markets, contracted suppliers, royal estates, local producers, and specialised merchants. London is one of the great commercial centres of Elizabethan England, and its markets connect the court to food, moving in from surrounding counties and farther afield. You can imagine the routes: cattle driven slowly toward the city, fish carried inland, butter packed into containers, grain moving by cart or river, fruit arriving according to season, imported goods passing through merchants who have handled commodities from ports far beyond England. The palace kitchen is therefore not just a workplace. It is the final stage of an enormous network. You return to the cart. A supplier is speaking with one of the household officers. The conversation is not friendly in the casual sense. Quantities are checked. Quality is examined. The royal household is a valuable customer, which also means there is plenty of opportunity for argument. A short measure here, a poor batch there, a price someone considers unreasonable, an item that arrived later than promised. Some aspects of food purchasing change from palace to palace and journey to journey, but the basic problem is timeless. Someone ordered something. Someone else insists that this is exactly what was ordered, and a third person is staring at it with the expression of a man who knows very well that it is not. You keep out of the dispute, a wise decision, instead. You help move a basket of onions. The smell follows you immediately. Onions are humble compared with imported cloves or costly sugar, yet they are useful, familiar, and widely available. Leeks, herbs, cabbages, peas, beans, roots, and other plant foods appear in Tudor diets, although what reaches a royal table and how it is prepared differs greatly from what a labouring household might eat. Season matters. This is still a world before modern refrigeration, global air freight, and supermarket shelves that look almost identical in January and July. Fresh produce comes and goes. Some foods can be dried, others pickled, fruit can be preserved, meat can be salted, fish can be dried or smoked. Grain stores well if kept properly. The kitchen plans around availability because nature does not care about court schedules. You glance toward a basket containing apples. They are not perfectly identical. Some are smaller, some bear marks on the skin. No one has rejected them for failing to look photogenic under bright supermarket lighting. They smell sweet and slightly sharp. Fruit may arrive fresh in season or be preserved for later use. Apples and pears are familiar. Plums and cherries appear when available. Dried fruits, such as raisins and currants, can travel farther and keep longer. And then there is sugar. You notice it because it is treated differently. Sugar in late 16th century England is not an everyday cheap ingredient for most people. It is imported, processed, expensive, and increasingly fashionable among elites. At court, however, it can appear in substantial quantities. It may sweeten dishes, preserves, sauces, confectionery, and decorative work. The wealthy consume sugar partly because they can. That simple fact carries more social meaning than it seems. A taste for sweetness becomes bound up with status, trade, display, and changing culinary fashion. There is also an odd consequence that Elizabeth herself becomes famous for. Later descriptions emphasize her darkened or damaged teeth. And heavy sugar consumption has often been blamed. The exact state of her teeth at different points in her life is difficult to reconstruct from hostile or fascinated observers. But the association between elite sugar use and dental trouble is very plausible. So there you are, serving one of the richest women in Europe a luxury that may be quietly attacking her smile. Royal service has its contradictions. Nearby, someone opens a container of spice. The smell is immediate. Pepper first, then something warmer, cloves perhaps, mace, nutmeg, cinnamon. These ingredients have travelled extraordinarily far. The major spice routes connect Asian growing regions with commercial networks passing through many hands before goods reach northern Europe. By the time a small quantity enters an English royal kitchen, merchants, sailors, wholesalers, and retailers may all have taken part. You hold a few peppercorns in your palm. They look insignificant, small, dark, dry, yet they represent distance. The English countryside outside may feel like the whole world when you're walking through mud in winter, but the Queen's pantry quietly proves otherwise. Her table is connected to India, Southeast Asia, the Mediterranean, Atlantic trade routes, and European merchant networks. Not always directly, not neatly, but unmistakably. One well-established feature of elite Tudor cuisine is its fondness for complex seasoning. Sweet and savoury flavours can mingle in ways that feel unfamiliar to many modern diners. Meat may appear with fruit, sugar, vinegar, spice, or richly flavoured sauces. The sharp separation between dessert sweetness and savoury main courses is not yet as rigid as it will become later. You might prepare meat with dried fruit, sweeten a sauce, add cinnamon where a modern diner expects only salt and pepper. If someone from the 21st century tells you that such combination sounds strange, you're entitled to remind them that they put pineapple on pizza and have therefore surrendered the right to judge anyone. The supplies continue arriving. A bundle of herbs, more bread grain, a cask, poultry, perhaps rabbits or game depending on season, location, and access. Fish requires particular attention because demand can rise dramatically on fast days. The rivers, coasts, fish markets, and preserved fish trade all contribute to keeping elite households supplied. Freshwater species such as pike, carp, bream, or trout can carry status, especially when drawn from managed ponds or estates. Sea fish adds another range of possibilities. Herring, cod, salmon, sole, turbot. Eels occupy their own curious place because they are common, useful, and frequently appear in medieval and early modern food records. You watch a servant inspect fish carefully. Freshness matters enormously. Smell, eyes, texture, everything is assessed. There is no refrigerated truck waiting outside to rescue poor planning. If food deteriorates, it deteriorates quickly. Scholars continue to examine how dependable royal provisioning systems were in practice, especially during periods when the court moved between residences. Surviving accounts can show impressive organisation, yet everyday shortages, substitutions, delays, and local improvisation are harder to recover. Paperwork tends to remember quantities better than frustration. You, however, would remember the frustration. A missing spice means changing a recipe. Poor fish means rejecting it. Late meat means reorganising an entire sequence. And if the queen moves, the problem becomes harder still. For the moment, the court remains supplied. The storerooms gradually fill, barrels stand against walls, baskets are sorted. Some goods are sent directly towards specialised departments. Others are counted before being released. Nothing expensive should vanish casually. Imported wine deserves particular care. Wine is both drink and status object. Elizabeth's court consumes wines imported from continental Europe. While ale and beer remain central to English drinking habits, water is certainly used. But modern assumptions that nobody drinks water at all are exaggerated. Clean water exists. The problem is reliability. In crowded settlements or questionable sources, contamination can be a real concern. While ale and beer offer familiar alternatives, you lift another basket. Your arms already ache slightly. The glamorous global trade network, you discover, eventually ends with someone carrying something heavy across a kitchen floor. It always does. A merchant may boast about distant seas. A courtier may admire rare spices. Elizabeth may appreciate a delicate confection. But before any of that happens, you have to get the sack off the cart. You set it down. Dust rises. The smell of grain fills the air. You run your fingers across the coarse fabric and look toward the growing collection of provisions. England is here. Its farms, its rivers, its roads, its markets, and beyond England. Fragments of a much larger world have arrived in barrels, sacks, jars, and tiny aromatic seeds. Soon all of it must be transformed, and that means returning to the hearths, where fire, iron, knives, and sheer experience will decide whether these precious ingredients become royal food or expensive disappointment. You turn back toward the hearths, and the kitchen suddenly feels less like a room and more like a collection of controlled dangers. Fire is everywhere, not hidden inside a neat iron box, not summoned with a button, not adjusted by turning a polished dial from medium to low. It burns openly in broad stone fireplaces, licking around logs, collapsing into beds of red coals, sending sparks upward whenever fresh wood is thrown onto the heat. Your job is not simply to cook beside it. You have to understand it. That takes practice. A newly lit fire behaves differently from one that has burned for hours. Thick logs give sustained heat. Smaller wood catches quickly. Embers radiate a steadier warmth. Flames can be fierce enough to scorch the outside of meat before the centre is ready. So you watch, you listen, you judge. The kitchen has no thermometer hanging conveniently beside the hearth. Temperature lives in colour, distance, timing, and experience. A bed of bright coals may tell you one thing. A roaring yellow flame tells you another. You learn how long your hand can tolerate being held near the heat. Not as a scientific measurement, but as one of many physical habits that slowly become instinct, and instinct matters because you are dealing with enormous quantities. A small domestic kitchen can forgive certain mistakes. A royal kitchen has heavier consequences. A badly managed fire beneath a large cauldron wastes fuel and food at the same time. A roast scorched before service cannot simply be hidden behind an apologetic little parsley leaf. Someone will notice. You move toward one of the spits. An iron bar stretches across the heat, carrying a heavy joint of meat. It turns steadily, slowly exposing each side to the fire. Roasting in this world means roasting before the flame rather than placing meat inside the enclosed oven familiar to you now. The difference is important. Heat arrives primarily from the fire in front, so the meat must rotate. Fat begins to melt. Droplets fall into a pan beneath. They hiss softly when they miss. The smell is deep and rich, mixing with smoke until it settles into your clothing. You will smell like this long after the work ends, probably while sleeping, possibly forever. A servant keeps the spit moving. The work looks simple until you imagine doing it for hours. Turn, wait, turn. Watch the fire, shift position, turn again. Large Tudor households sometimes employ servants specifically associated with turning spits, and mechanical devices also exist to reduce the burden. Water power, clockwork-like mechanisms, weights, and later animal-powered systems all appear in the long history of spit turning, though the exact equipment available depends greatly on place, date, and household. Here, human labour remains the safest assumption, and human labour gets tired. You see it in the servant's shoulders. The repetitive strain is almost hypnotic from a distance. Up close, it is simply exhausting. You take hold of a long-handled utensil. Iron is everywhere because iron tolerates the conditions. Hooks, spits, grates, knives, skimmers, ladles, pans. Some vessels are made from copper or copper alloys, prized because they conduct heat effectively. That advantage comes with complications. Copper reacts with certain foods, particularly acidic mixtures, so good vessels are often lined internally with tin. The lining does not last forever, it can wear away. So cookware itself requires maintenance. You run your eyes across the interior of a vessel and notice the pale lining beneath the stains of use. Even the pot has a working life. Nothing here is effortless. One practical truth of elite Tudor cooking is that specialized equipment can be remarkably sophisticated. Kitchens belonging to wealthy institutions use large cauldrons, pastry ovens, roasting ranges, dripping pans, mortars, knives, strainers, and vessels designed for particular tasks. This is not primitive cooking, it is pre-industrial cooking. There is a difference. The techniques can be highly developed even when the energy source is wood and muscle. You step toward the chopping table. A row of knives lies nearby. They are tools first, decorative objects second. Blades vary according to purpose and maker. Some are broad for chopping, others are narrower for more precise work. Cleavers deal with heavier tasks. Each blade needs care. A dull knife slows you down and can become more dangerous because you press harder. Sharpening is therefore part of the routine. You take one blade and draw it carefully against a sharpening surface. The sound is rough, metal against stone. Again. The edge improves gradually. You test it with the cautious confidence of someone who has done this before. There are no disposable razor replacements waiting in a drawer. A good blade is valuable. It is maintained. Pass through hands. Repaired when possible. You place it back on the table. Nearby, a mortar waits beside a pestle. You begin crushing spices. The action is slower than using a modern grinder. Peppercorns break first, then become coarse fragments. Then something finer. The smell intensifies with every movement. The kitchen has its own soundtrack now. Crackling fire, scraping iron, pounding mortar, chopping boards, footsteps, water splashing, people calling short instructions. The sound rarely stops. You begin to understand why experienced cooks may communicate through brief phrases rather than long explanations. There is too much noise for poetry. One servant carries a large pot using a cloth wrapped around the handle. He moves carefully. You move aside immediately. Burns are an obvious occupational hazard, a splash of boiling liquid, a hand against heated metal, a sleeve too close to flame, an ember underfoot. The danger is constant enough that caution becomes automatic. Clothing matters. Loose fabric around fire is risky. But 16th century garments are not designed according to modern workplace safety regulations. Wool and linen are common materials. Aprons protect clothing from grease and stains. Though no apron can make an open hearth harmless, you keep your sleeves controlled as you work. That is simply sensible. The kitchen ceiling above you gathers smoke and soot despite chimneys carrying much of it away. Chimney design has improved considerably by the Tudor period, particularly in elite buildings, allowing fires to be more effectively vented than in older halls where smoke might drift through roof openings. Still, Perfect ventilation is not what you experience. Your throat knows the difference. Wood smoke enters your lungs. Your eyes sting. Fine soot settles on surfaces. It becomes part of the atmosphere. Some modern reconstructions make these kitchens look almost romantic. Golden firelight, copper vessels glowing warmly, stone arches, a roast turning elegantly. Stand in the room for 10 hours and the romance becomes more complicated. The firelight is lovely, the smoke is not. The copper shines beautifully, it is also heavy. The roast smells wonderful. Someone still has to turn it. You adjust a vessel over the coals. It sits not directly within the highest flame, but where heat can be controlled. Cooking becomes an exercise in geometry. Closer, farther, higher, lower. You can suspend pots from hooks or chains at different heights. Move them slightly, rotate them, shift embers beneath them. The cook controls temperature through position rather than electronics. This is one reason experience matters so much. Recipes from the period often provide less precise timing and measurement than a modern cookbook reader expects. Instructions may assume that the cook already knows what terms like a reasonable fire, sufficient boiling, or proper thickness look like. Written guidance does not replace skill. It depends on skill. There is something oddly reassuring in that. The kitchen is full of knowledge that lives in hands, how dough feels, how smoke smells when fat begins to burn, how the surface of broth changes before boiling, how quickly a particular pot heats, how close meat should sit to the hearth. You cannot learn all of it by reading. You learn by watching someone older, making mistakes, repeating tasks, and slowly becoming the person whom someone younger watches. Researchers working with surviving household accounts and archaeological evidence still have to reconstruct many details of daily kitchen technique, because inventories tell us that a household owned a vessel, but not exactly how one particular cook used it on one particular morning. The missing details live in vanished habits. You feel those habits around you now. A cook lifts a pan without thinking. A servant shifts a log before being told. Someone catches a sauce before it sticks. That quiet competence keeps the whole operation moving. Then you notice something unusual beside the hearth. A long iron implement lies near a collection of hooks and supports. Blackened from repeated exposure to fire. Some objects in surviving Tudor kitchens are so specialised that their exact use can be difficult to identify centuries later, especially when descriptions in inventories use terms that later fall out of everyday language. For you, of course, there is no mystery. You know which hook lifts which vessel. You know where the dripping pan belongs. You know which iron is too hot to touch. Future historians may puzzle over terminology. You're simply trying not to burn lunch. Another log goes onto the fire. The flames rise. The kitchen brightens for a moment, and with the equipment finally arranged, knives sharpened, spits turning, pots heating, and coals managed into something close to obedience, the first meal of the royal day begins to take shape. Soon the food leaving these smoky rooms will become breakfast, and breakfast for a queen, you are about to discover, is never quite as simple as it sounds. There is no grand procession yet, no crowded hall glittering with ambassadors, no elaborate sugar sculpture waiting to impress anyone. Morning food is more restrained, but that does not mean casual. You're still serving a queen. And serving a queen means that even something as familiar as bread, butter, or ale exists inside a world of routine, rank, and preference. The kitchen has softened slightly from its earlier frenzy. Fires are established now. Water is hot. Knives have found their rhythm. Servants know where they need to stand. The palace itself is waking. You hear movement beyond the kitchen corridors. Doors open. Footsteps pass overhead. Somewhere, attendants begin preparing rooms that you will never enter. You turn toward the bread. It is one of the safest anchors of the Tudor table. Fine white bread belongs to those with status and money, and Elizabeth's household naturally expects the best quality available. The loaf is cut carefully. Crumbs scatter across the board. You gather them almost automatically. Nothing useful should disappear without thought. Beside the bread sits butter. It is familiar enough to you, although the flavour may be stronger than the mild, standardised butter of a modern supermarket. Production depends on local dairies. Season, storage, salt, and handling. Cheese is another possibility. England produces a wide range of cheeses, some soft and fresh, others harder and better suited to keeping in a royal environment. Choice can be greater than in an ordinary household. Eggs appear frequently in period cookery as well, boiled, poached, fried. Worked into sauces, pastries, custards, and countless preparations, you crack one carefully. No little machine has graded it by size. No plastic carton has protected it on a refrigerated journey. It came from a bird, through someone's hands, into a basket, onto a cart, and finally into yours. The simplicity is almost relaxing. Then someone calls for ale. Ale and beer occupy a place in daily life that can look strange from a modern perspective. They are not reserved for evening entertainment. Low-strength forms can appear routinely because they provide calories, familiarity, and dependable storage compared with uncertain water sources. That does not mean every person in Tudor England walks around permanently drunk. The strength varies, consumption patterns vary, and water is certainly drunk where clean sources are trusted. But fermented drink is ordinary enough that no one here considers morning ale particularly dramatic. You pour it without ceremony. If you ordered a breakfast beer in a modern office meeting, someone might schedule a private conversation with you. Here, you are simply punctual. The Queen's own morning habits are harder to reconstruct with the precision people sometimes imagine. Royal household records can tell us enormous amounts about provisioning and expenditure, but they do not provide a perfect diary of every bite Elizabeth takes on every morning of 1598. Her routine also changes with location, health, ceremony, travel, and circumstance. So you work with the household rather than with a fantasy menu carved permanently into stone. Some mornings might involve relatively modest fare, bread, drink, perhaps meat, eggs, dairy, preserves. Other foods may appear according to need and appetite. The central point is not extravagance at every waking moment. It is availability. If the Queen wants something appropriate, the household is supposed to provide it. You check a small dish of preserved fruit. Preservation matters greatly in a seasonal world. Fresh fruit cannot remain fresh indefinitely, so cooks and household specialists use techniques involving sugar, drying, cooking, or storage to extend its life. For wealthy people, preserved fruits can be highly desirable. Sugar transforms them. A plum, quince, cherry, or other fruit might be cooked into a sweet preserve, syrup, paste, or confection. Quince especially lends itself to thick preparations that can be moulded or cut. The scent is delicate beneath the stronger kitchen smells. For a moment you almost forget the smoke. Then someone drops a metal utensil. The clang brings you back immediately. A small quantity of meat may also be prepared. Tudor eating habits among the wealthy can be heavily meat-centred by modern standards. Beef, mutton, pork, poultry, rabbit, game, and other meats all appear depending on season, rules, availability, and rank. Breakfast itself is a complicated subject because meal patterns are changing over the early modern period. Two substantial meals, dinner and supper, remain deeply important, while breakfast is not necessarily universal in the same way a modern listener expects. Some people eat it regularly, others may not. Status, work, health, age, and personal habit all matter. Among royal servants who have been working for hours already, the practical appeal is obvious. You certainly feel hungry. Whether you're allowed to stop long enough to notice is another matter. One surviving reality of elite household life is that servants can receive food allowances as part of their compensation and maintenance. Feeding the workforce is not an optional act of kindness. A great household depends upon keeping its people functioning. Your own meal, however, will not resemble the Queen's service. Her food moves upward through a sequence of hands. Presentation becomes cleaner as it leaves the working kitchen behind. Greasy cloths disappear. Rough chopping boards remain downstairs. Dishes are transferred. Hands are checked. Clothing is expected to be orderly. The transformation fascinates you. A few minutes ago, the food existed beside ash and wood smoke. Soon it will enter rooms of polished furniture, textiles, silver, controlled movement, and formal attention. That transition is almost theatrical. The kitchen creates the backstage reality. The royal chambers receive the performance. Security adds another layer. Elizabeth has survived plots, religious conflict, rebellion, and decades of political anxiety. Threats against monarchs are taken seriously. Stories about poison naturally flourish around royal courts. One small but curious ritual connected to elite food service involves the handling and sometimes formal testing of dishes, utensils, or serving materials. The exact procedures shift across periods and households, and later retellings often turn practical safeguards into dramatic scenes of trembling tasters waiting to collapse. Reality is usually less cinematic. Still, controlled access is real. The Queen does not casually accept food from unknown hands. You are one link in a guarded chain. A dish is checked, a servant carries it. Another officer may oversee its movement. Ranked service protects both dignity and safety. You watch one plate leave the kitchen. It disappears through the doorway. Your work goes with it. But your presence does not. That is normal. Royal service often makes the servant invisible at the moment the finished result becomes impressive. You do not stand beside Elizabeth waiting for praise. You return to the fire. Another loaf needs cutting. Another pan needs watching. Another request is already coming. There is some uncertainty among specialists about how strictly formal household regulations were followed during every ordinary meal. Rules survive beautifully on paper, but lived routine can be more flexible, especially when the court is moving. The Queen is unwell, supplies are delayed, or senior servants improvise. You would probably laugh at anyone expecting perfect consistency. You have been in the kitchen since darkness. You know better. Still, the system works because enough people know what is expected. You lift a small pot from the heat. The contents smell of fruit and spice. Nearby, bread is stacked, ale is carried out. The morning meal begins moving through the household in different directions according to rank. Some food travels toward chambers of privilege. Some remains for officers. Some eventually reaches servants. The palace eats in layers. And above those layers, Elizabeth begins another day of rule. You pause for only a moment, listening to the softened crackle of the fire. Breakfast feels modest compared with what lies ahead. That is almost deceptive, because the great meal of the day is approaching. Dinner will require more fires, more meat, more timing, more servants, more noise, and far less room for hesitation. You set the empty vessel down. Someone calls for the next preparation. And the quieter part of the morning is over. The quieter rhythm disappears almost at once. Dinner is coming, in your world. That word does not necessarily mean an evening meal. For a royal household in 1598, dinner is commonly the main meal of the day, often served around late morning or midday, depending on circumstance. So while a modern visitor might still be thinking about coffee, you are preparing for the most demanding culinary operation of the day. The fires burn hotter. More servants appear. Tables that looked merely busy an hour ago now seem completely occupied. Raw meat waits beside chopping boards. Pastry is being rolled. Sauces simmer in heavy vessels. Fish are cleaned. Birds are trussed. Herbs are chopped. Someone is pounding spices with enough force to suggest that the mortar has personally offended him. You're assigned to a roasting station. A large joint turns slowly before the hearth. Its surface has begun to darken, and hot fat runs downward into the dripping pan below. You lean close enough to inspect it, not too close. You learned that lesson earlier. The meat needs time, but timing is not your only concern. A great royal dinner does not consist of one roast appearing proudly in the middle of a table. It can involve many dishes arriving in organized groups, meats, poultry, fish, pies, tarts, sauces, broths, vegetables, custards, fruit preparations. Sweet dishes, the variety depends on season, occasion, religious rules, the Queen's preferences, and the status of those being served. The challenge is coordination. Imagine trying to prepare several complicated dishes in a kitchen with no electronic timers, no digital thermometers, no refrigeration, and no single oven temperature you can trust. Now add servants moving around you, several open fires, heavy cookware, formal service requirements, and the possibility that the Queen's schedule changes. Relaxing, isn't it? You reach for a ladle, the sauce beside you has thickened. Tudor sauces can be surprisingly complex. Breadcrumbs may be used as thickeners, vinegar brings sharpness, wine adds depth, sugar creates sweetness, spices supply warmth, ground nuts, fruit, eggs, herbs, and stock can all play a part depending on the recipe. The flavour world is not divided neatly into the modern categories you expect. Sweetness can accompany meat, fruit can sit beside poultry, cinnamon may enter savoury preparations, vinegar may sharpen something rich. A good cook balances these elements by taste and experience. You lift a small amount with the spoon, too thin. Back over the heat. Someone nearby begins preparing a pie. This is not necessarily the delicate dessert pastry you picture. Meat pies are important features of elite cooking. A sturdy pastry case can contain meat, poultry, game, spices, fruit, or combinations of ingredients. Some crusts are designed partly as cooking containers and may be much harder than modern pastry. The phrase coffin can be used for a pastry casing, which sounds wonderfully alarming until you remember that Tudor cooks are not attempting to make lunch emotionally reassuring. A servant presses dough into shape, another trims the edge. Inside goes a seasoned filling. The pie will help protect the contents while cooking and can also make service more impressive. Presentation matters. That becomes increasingly obvious as finished dishes begin moving toward the service area. The Queen does not merely need to be fed. Her household needs to demonstrate abundance. One dependable feature of late Tudor elite dining is the serving of multiple dishes during a meal, sometimes arranged in courses or removes that replace one set of foods with another. Not every diner necessarily eats every dish. The sheer presence of variety carries meaning. A loaded table says wealth. It says access. It says organization. It says that the monarch can command land, labor, animals, imported goods, skilled cooks, and servants simply to produce one meal. You're starting to suspect that dinner is political even before anyone upstairs begins discussing politics. The roasting joint needs attention. You baste it using fat collected below. The liquid hits the hot surface and releases another cloud of aroma. Smoke, meat, herbs, fat. Your stomach reacts immediately. You ignore it. There is no time. At another hearth, birds turn on smaller spits. Capon and chicken are familiar choices, while more prestigious tables may also see geese, ducks, pheasants, partridges, or other birds depending on availability. Peacock still possesses ceremonial associations in elite dining. Although by Elizabeth's reign it is hardly an everyday necessity, one of the stranger decorative habits inherited from earlier banquet traditions involves presenting cooked birds in ways that imitate their living appearance, sometimes using feathers or elaborate decoration. Whether your palace kitchen does this today is another matter. You quietly hope not. Reattaching feathers to dinner feels like the sort of idea invented by someone who never had to clean the kitchen afterward. Nearby, a fish dish is being prepared. Even on days when meat is allowed, fish can appear because variety itself is desirable. The fish is seasoned and arranged carefully. A sauce containing wine and spice is prepared beside it. Then someone calls for a tray. The pace increases. Finished dishes cannot simply wait forever. A roast loses heat, pastry softens, sauces change texture. so every preparation must converge at roughly the right moment. You begin to appreciate the role of senior kitchen officers. Someone has to see the whole operation. You may understand the roast in front of you perfectly, but someone else must know when the pies are ready, when the fish is leaving, whether the sauce has arrived, whether the correct serving vessels are prepared, and whether the household above is ready to receive the food. This is logistics disguised as cuisine. A messenger enters. The room reacts before he finishes speaking. A timing adjustment. Nothing catastrophic. Only enough to irritate everyone. The Queen is not a restaurant customer with a reservation at 12 sharp. Court life follows ceremony, business, worship, audiences, health, visitors, and royal preference. A delay upstairs becomes a problem downstairs. Food does not politely stop cooking because politics has taken longer than expected. The roast can be moved farther from the heat. A sauce can be held carefully. Some dishes tolerate waiting better than others. Experienced cooks know which can survive. That knowledge is more valuable than panic. You shift the spit slightly. The heat drops. Around you. Servants do the same kind of quiet recalculation. This is where written recipes become less useful than practiced judgment. Some surviving Elizabethan cookery books offer quantities and instructions that appear vague to modern eyes. They may tell the reader to boil something sufficiently, season it well, or bake it until it is done. That is because the intended user is expected to understand cooking already. The page does not need to explain every gesture. The cook completes the instruction. Even scholars reconstructing royal meals today have to be cautious about equating printed recipes with exactly what Elizabeth personally ate. Cookbooks reveal culinary possibilities and fashions, while household accounts show purchases and consumption. But neither gives a perfect plate-by-plate record of every royal dinner. Your kitchen lives in that gap. Recipes provide tradition, supplies provide limits, the Queen provides preference, and you provide adaptation. The messenger finally gives the signal. Now, everything changes. Servants lift dishes, cloths are straightened, trays are organised, the roast comes away from the fire. You test it one final time before carving begins. Steam rises from the cut surface. Juices collect below. No applause, just movement. The meat joins pies, birds, sauces, fish, bread, and other dishes being directed toward service for a few minutes. The kitchen seems to empty itself into the palace. You watch the food disappear through the doorway. Upstairs, the scene will look calm. Servants will move with controlled formality. Platters will arrive. Guests may admire the abundance. The Queen may choose only a little from a great deal. No one at the table will hear the shouted instructions that produced it. They will not feel the heat against your face. They will not see the flour on your sleeve. They will not know how narrowly one sauce escaped burning when the royal schedule changed. That invisibility is part of success. If everything works perfectly, the labour disappears. You stand for a moment beside the hearth, shoulders aching, hands greasy, face warm from the fire. Then you realise the kitchen is not finished. Of course it is not. Some dishes still need attention. Servants require feeding. Equipment must be cleared. Preparations for later meals are already beginning. And somewhere above you sits Elizabeth herself, tasting only a fraction of what this enormous system has created. Which raises a question you have been too busy to consider. What does the Queen actually like? The question stays with you as another dish leaves the kitchen. What does Elizabeth actually like to eat? It sounds simple, but royal appetite is difficult to separate from royal image. The Queen does not sit down with a notebook and kindly record every preference for future historians. What survives instead is a mixture of household accounts, court observations, medical advice, menus, purchases, ceremonial records, and later stories that grow more polished each time they are repeated. So you work with fragments. You know that Elizabeth belongs to a court where meat, fine bread, wine, spices, sugar, preserved fruit, pastry, poultry, and elaborate sauces are all available in quantities ordinary families could scarcely imagine. But availability is not the same as appetite. A queen may be surrounded by abundance and still eat selectively. You notice this whenever a tray returns. Some dishes are barely touched, others come back reduced. Servants notice these patterns even if no one formally announces them. A cook learns if one preparation regularly disappears. It matters if another returns untouched. That matters too. Royal kitchens may be built on hierarchy, but they are also built on observation. Elizabeth is often associated with a fondness for sweet things, and this reputation fits the broader culinary habits of elite Tudor society. Sugar has become a marker of refinement. It appears in preserved fruits, sweetened wines, confections, pastries, sauces, medicinal preparations, and decorative works designed to impress guests. You see it being measured now. White crystals fall into a bowl. They look almost innocent. In this room, though, sugar is expensive enough to deserve respect. It has crossed long distances and passed through many hands before reaching the royal kitchen. That journey is tied to trade networks that are already becoming entangled with plantation agriculture and forced labour in parts of the Atlantic and Mediterranean worlds. You do not see those distant systems from the hearth. You only see the final luxury, a small mound of sweetness. Yet the Queen's table is connected to all of it. You stir the mixture. The sugar dissolves. A sharp fruit scent rises with it. Preserved fruit is particularly useful because it allows sweetness to survive beyond harvest season. Quince can become a dense paste. Cherries may be preserved. Pears can be cooked with wine and spice. Ginger may be candied. Marzipan, built from almonds and sugar, offers another luxurious possibility to you. These ingredients signal status as clearly as velvet sleeves or jewelled brooches. There is a slightly less glamorous side to this enthusiasm. Elizabeth's teeth become a subject of comment in later accounts, and sugar is often blamed for their poor condition. Some stories even claim that blackened teeth become fashionable because women attempt to imitate the Queen. That particular tale is difficult to pin down securely, and it may owe more to later imagination than everyday fashion. Still, the underlying point is plausible enough. Frequent sugar consumption is not especially kind to teeth. You glance at the bowl again. Delicious. Prestigious. Potentially disastrous. A perfect court ingredient. Meat remains central as well. Beef, mutton, venison, poultry, and game all belong to the elite food world surrounding Elizabeth. But you should not picture the Queen personally devouring mountains of roast meat every day while waving away vegetables in royal contempt. Household consumption reflects the needs of hundreds of people. The presence of huge quantities tells you about the court as an institution, not just one woman's stomach. This distinction matters. A monarch's household accounts can easily make her look like the hungriest person in Europe if you forget that an entire hierarchy is eating around her. You prepare a smaller dish now, seasoned more delicately. Elizabeth is in her 60s, and age matters. By 1598 she has ruled for 40 years. Her health, digestion, teeth, energy, and personal habits are not those of a young princess. Physicians and attendants take her condition seriously because the health of the Queen is also a matter of state. There is no acknowledged heir. Every illness invites anxiety, and food becomes part of that concern. A physician may advise restraint. A particular food may be described as warming or cooling. Another may be considered easier to digest. Wine can be recommended in one context and discouraged in another. The medical framework around you is based heavily on humoral theory. The idea that health depends upon balancing bodily qualities associated with heat, cold, moisture, and dryness. You will encounter those ideas more directly later. For now, they influence your kitchen through requests. Perhaps a dish needs to be lighter. Perhaps something rich should be avoided. Perhaps a sauce should be adjusted. You do not argue with the physician. You also quietly suspect that the physician does not have to stand beside the fire making the change, a familiar problem. The Queen's public appearance adds another complication. Elizabeth's image is carefully constructed. She presents herself as controlled, disciplined, magnificent, and almost beyond ordinary physical weakness. Eating, by contrast, is an ordinary bodily act. Royal ceremony therefore manages it. Sometimes monarchs dine publicly, turning the meal itself into spectacle. On other occasions, eating may be more private. Exactly how often Elizabeth chooses one form over another changes across her reign and circumstance. The surviving record does not let you watch every meal. That uncertainty is important because later stories often make her habits sound much more fixed than they probably were. You hear another order. Something lighter is wanted. You reach for broth. Broths and soups can offer nourishment without the heaviness of a large roast. Eggs, bread, wine, herbs, and small pieces of meat can be combined in ways that suit appetite and perceived health. You begin preparing a smooth mixture. The kitchen around you is still loud, yet this particular task requires patience. Too much heat and the texture changes. Too little and it fails to come together. You stir slowly. One of the enduring assumptions about Tudor food is that everything must be aggressively spiced. That is too crude. Spices are important, certainly, but skilled cooking still depends on balance. Pepper should not obliterate everything. Cinnamon does not need to dominate every plate. Imported spice is prestigious, but prestige is not the same as carelessness. A royal cook is expected to understand proportion. You add only what the dish requires, the scent changes almost immediately. Warm, subtle, enough. That quiet restraint may impress you more than extravagance. Anyone with wealth can pile expensive ingredients into a bowl. Skill lies in knowing when to stop. The same is true of wine. Elizabethan elite dining has access to imported wines from France, Spain, Portugal, and elsewhere. Sweet wines are particularly fashionable. Sack, a broad term used for certain fortified or strong white wines imported from Iberia, becomes highly associated with English drinking culture. You may use wine in sauces as well as serve it in cups. The kitchen therefore treats it as both beverage and ingredient. A little enters the pot. Steam carries the aroma upward. Elsewhere, confectioners may be creating something far more dramatic. Sugar can be shaped into elaborate forms, especially for banquets. Figures, animals, buildings, heraldic designs, entire decorative landscapes can be produced from sugar-based materials. The Queen may not eat much of such a display. That hardly matters. Its purpose is to astonish. Food at court has to satisfy several appetites at once: hunger, status, curiosity, diplomacy, vanity. The eye must eat too. You begin to see Elizabeth's diet less as a list of favourite foods and more as a negotiation between pleasure, health, ceremony, and politics. She may enjoy sweetness. She may prefer certain meats. She may reject dishes according to mood or health. Her physicians may intervene. Her household officers may interpret her wishes. The kitchen may adapt before the Queen herself ever speaks directly to anyone below stairs. There is still disagreement about how much weight should be given to later anecdotes about her personal eating habits, especially stories written long after the events or filtered through hostile observers. The safest picture is not one of a queen with a fixed menu. It is one of a woman surrounded by extraordinary choice. That may actually be more interesting. You finish the broth. A servant takes it. Another plate returns. You glance at what remains. The sweet preparation is almost gone. That tells you something. Not everything, but something. And as you wipe the edge of the bowl clean, you realize that the Queen's preferences are only one part of the day's problem. For every dish sent toward Elizabeth, dozens more must travel elsewhere, because beyond the royal chambers wait courtiers, guards, officers, clerks, musicians, attendants, and servants. The palace has many mouths, and they are all expecting to be fed. The scale of the household becomes clearer the moment you stop thinking about Elizabeth's plate. Her meal may attract the attention, ceremony, silver, and anxiety, But beyond the royal chambers stretches an entire human population that expects food as part of daily service. Courtiers, guards, clerks, chaplains, musicians, gentlemen, ladies, stable workers, messengers, kitchen servants, porters, officers, visitors, ambassadors. The palace eats like a small town. You notice this most clearly after the Queen's dishes have gone upstairs and the kitchen does not relax. Instead, the work changes direction. More bread is cut, more meat is portioned, more drink is sent out. Pots that seemed secondary earlier suddenly become important. The grandest dishes may have been prepared with Elizabeth and her immediate circle in mind, but the majority of people in the household still need something substantial, and they do not all receive the same thing. Rank determines food. You have already seen that principle in the pale bread reserved for higher status tables. Now you watch the system unfold across the entire household. A senior courtier may receive fine bread, generous meat, better drink, and more varied dishes. A lower servant may receive coarser bread, simpler fare, and a more restricted allowance. An officer attached to one department may be entitled to different portions from someone working elsewhere. The distinctions are not random. Household regulations can define them with surprising precision. This is one of the clearest realities of royal life in Tudor England. Food is part of compensation. Many servants do not simply receive wages and then go shopping independently for every meal. They are maintained by the household, receiving food, drink, fuel, lodging, clothing allowances, or other provisions according to status and office. So when you divide a joint of meat, you're also helping distribute pay. A slice can represent entitlement, a loaf can represent hierarchy, a cup of wine can tell you more about a person's position than a long conversation might. The kitchen becomes a map of social rank made edible. You carry a platter toward a preparation table. A clerk or officer nearby checks quantities. Records matter because feeding hundreds of people is expensive. Imagine the opportunity for waste, theft, favours, errors, and quiet disappearance. One extra portion means little. One extra portion repeated across hundreds of meals becomes a serious expense, so the household counts, it records, it controls access. That does not mean the system is perfect. No system containing hungry humans has ever achieved perfection. But the aspiration is clear. Food should go where it is assigned. You hear the names of different household divisions. The royal household is not one undifferentiated crowd. It contains specialized departments with their own officers, duties, and privileges. The kitchen itself belongs within a network that includes the pantry, buttery, cellar, bakehouse, larder, scullery, poultry, pastry, and other offices. Bread may come through one department, wine through another, meat through another. Each area has its own responsibilities. To a modern listener, this may sound unnecessarily complicated. Why not just have one enormous kitchen manager and a spreadsheet? Because you are standing inside a system built gradually over centuries, shaped by tradition, privilege, accountability, and ceremony. Also, there is no spreadsheet. You're forced to rely on memory, paper, ink, hierarchy, and people shouting, remarkably. It works often enough. A group of guards receives food. Their needs are practical. They cannot protect entrances or accompany the Queen while fainting from hunger. Musicians must also eat. So must chaplains. So must clerks producing the endless paperwork that keeps royal administration alive. Even people who appear decorative from your position downstairs belong to functioning offices. The court is both spectacle and workplace. You pass another table where bread is being sorted. The better loaves are already gone. Rougher bread remains. No one pretends that everyone deserves identical quality. The concept would be strange here. Social inequality is not hidden. It is organized, visible, expected. Even seating at meals can reflect precedence. Who sits where matters. Who shares a table matters. Who is served first matters. A person arriving from your century might find this exhausting. You would need an instruction manual simply to avoid insulting someone with the wrong chair. You suspect this is why so many courtiers become skilled at smiling while internally panicking. Visitors complicate everything further. An ambassador arriving with attendants is not merely an extra mouth. He is a diplomatic event. His treatment reflects the dignity of the crown. Feeding him poorly could appear insulting. Feeding him magnificently sends a different message. Hospitality becomes political language. A well-stocked table says England is prosperous. A varied meal says the Queen commands resources. Imported wine and spice hint at commercial reach. Game and venison suggest access to estates and privilege. Silver plate reflects wealth. Even leftovers can carry meaning. You begin to understand why food service attracts such careful attention. A curious custom helps explain how deeply household food is linked to status in some elite establishments. Portions or allowances known by traditional terms can be attached to offices, and certain servants may claim rights to remnants, scraps, used materials, or uneaten food. These small benefits can become valuable enough to cause arguments. A bone still has marrow, fat can be rendered, leftover bread can be reused, candle ends have value, old kitchen materials can be sold or repurposed. Nothing disappears simply because the Queen has finished eating. The remains of magnificence trickle downward. You see a servant collecting pieces that would look unimportant to someone upstairs. To him, they matter. Perhaps they supplement his own food. Perhaps they belong to a recognized custom. Perhaps he knows exactly what can be traded. The palace produces its own small economy beneath the formal one. Not every detail of these rites is easy to reconstruct for Elizabeth's household in 1598. Surviving ordinances, accounts, and later descriptions reveal the structure. But actual daily practice may have varied considerably between residences, offices, and individual departments. Written rules suggest neatness. Daily life adds negotiation. You can almost hear it. That belongs to our office. No, it was assigned to us. The steward said otherwise. A dispute over a leftover roast would not be glamorous enough for a history painting, but it would be very human. You carry another portion away. Servants lower in the hierarchy are finally eating. Their meal is simpler. That does not make it unimportant. They have already worked for hours. Some will continue into the evening. A kitchen boy who has been hauling wood needs calories just as surely as a nobleman who has spent the morning discussing state affairs. Possibly more. You watch him tear bread with both hands. There is no ceremony, no silver, no polished presentation, just hunger-meeting food. For a moment, the hierarchy almost disappears. Almost. Then an officer walks through, and everyone shifts slightly. The invisible ladder returns. Another group waits. You realize that the kitchen's work expands with every person attached to the court, and the court can expand dramatically during special occasions. Visitors arrive. Nobles bring retainers. Diplomatic delegations appear. Celebrations multiply expectations. A normal day is already demanding. A banquet is something else entirely. The ordinary business of feeding rank becomes theatre. Sugar stops being merely sweet and becomes sculpture. Food is gilded. Tables are arranged to astonish. Musicians perform. Guests watch one another, watching the Queen, and the kitchen, already strained by hundreds of daily meals, is asked to turn dinner into spectacle. You glance toward the remaining sugar. Someone has already begun preparing it. The white mass is being worked carefully. Not simply for flavour, for display. The next stage of your day is taking shape before your eyes. The sugar looks harmless while it is still sitting in a bowl. White, expensive, faintly sparkling in the firelight. Then the specialists begin working with it, and you realise that the royal kitchen is about to stop behaving like a kitchen and start behaving like a workshop for edible architecture. A banquet is approaching. That changes everything. Ordinary meals already display rank and abundance. But a banquet can push those ideas into spectacle. Food is expected to do more than satisfy hunger. It must surprise the eye, flatter important guests, celebrate the Queen, and remind everyone in the room that they are standing inside one of Europe's great courts. You watch sugar being heated and prepared. This requires care. Too much heat ruins it. Too little makes it difficult to shape. Almonds may be ground for marchpane, the ancestor of modern marzipan, while other sugar mixtures can be moulded into decorative forms. The mortar begins pounding. Almonds become finer beneath the pestle. Sugar is incorporated. The resulting paste can be shaped, coloured, decorated, and sometimes gilded. Yes, gilded. Because apparently being able to eat your sculpture is not extravagant enough. It should also shine. Gold leaf can be used decoratively on elite foods. The quantity is tiny, but the visual effect under candlelight can be extraordinary. You imagine carrying such a dish into an ordinary village household. Everyone would probably stare at you. Then someone practical would ask why you put perfectly good gold on pudding. At court, however, impracticality can be part of the message. A banquet announces that the household possesses enough resources to spend labour and valuable ingredients on objects that exist mainly to delight and impress. The word banquet itself does not always mean exactly what a modern listener expects. In Tudor elite culture, a banquet can refer particularly to a separate course or occasion involving sweetmeats, fruit, confections, wafers, spiced delicacies, and wine, sometimes enjoyed in a specially designed banqueting space after the heavier meal. You may therefore have already eaten an enormous dinner before someone effectively says, "Excellent. Now let us go somewhere else and eat sugar." Human civilization has produced worse traditions. The work table becomes crowded. Someone prepares fruit preserves, another shapes marchpane. Small confections are arranged carefully. There may be comfits, seeds or spices coated repeatedly in sugar until they form hard little sweets. Aniseed can be treated this way. So can fennel or coriander seeds. The process requires patience because repeated layers of syrup must build gradually around the centre. These are not snacks poured rapidly from an industrial machine. They represent time, labour, sugar, skill, and therefore money. You pick up one finished comfit, tiny, smooth, almost absurdly small considering the work behind it. That is precisely why it belongs here, at the royal court. Difficulty can increase prestige. Nearby, another preparation is becoming much larger. A decorative subtlety may appear between courses or as part of elaborate dining display. These creations can take symbolic forms, representing buildings, animals, heraldic devices, religious or classical figures, political ideas, or scenes designed to complement the host. Earlier medieval traditions had already made food into theatre, and Tudor banqueting continues that appetite for visual surprise. The object taking shape before you may not be entirely sugar, pastry, marchpane, wood supports, colouring, or other materials can contribute depending on the design. What matters is the effect. Imagine entering a chamber expecting dessert and discovering a miniature fortress sitting on the table, or a heraldic beast, or a scene praising the Queen's virtues. You begin to understand why cooks and confectioners are not merely feeding guests. They are collaborating with ceremony. Elizabeth's image is especially suited to this kind of display. By 1598, the Queen has spent decades cultivating visual symbols of monarchy. Pearls suggest purity. Classical references connect her with learned traditions. Mythological imagery can elevate her beyond ordinary womanhood. Her unmarried status has become part of the political language surrounding the so-called Virgin Queen. A banquet can reinforce that language without anyone giving a speech. A symbolic figure made from sugar may praise chastity. A design may celebrate victory. Another may refer to peace, abundance, or imperial aspiration. The guests understand the references. Food becomes propaganda that you can nibble afterward. You continue working. A servant brings colouring ingredients. Natural pigments can transform pale sugarwork into more dramatic forms. Saffron produces yellow. Plant materials can create greens. Other ingredients provide reds, browns, or darker tones. Then comes gilding. A breath could disturb the delicate leaf. You hold still while it is applied. The room suddenly seems unusually quiet around that tiny action. There is something almost ridiculous about the concentration required to place a fragment of gold onto something destined to disappear. But perhaps that is the point. Court magnificence is temporary by nature. Candles burn down, flowers wilt, music ends, food is eaten, the Queen's gowns are eventually put away. For a few hours, however, the effect is complete. Music may accompany formal dining or the entertainment surrounding it. Elizabeth's court values musicians, and the Queen herself is famously associated with music and dancing. Instruments such as viols, lutes, trumpets, recorders, and keyboards inhabit the soundscape of elite life. You will not hear all of them from the kitchen. What reaches you is muffled. A distant melody through walls, a burst of voices, perhaps applause. Down here, your percussion section remains knives and pots. Still, the connection matters. Upstairs, sight, sound, taste, clothing, architecture, and ceremony combine. The banquet is a total performance. Foreign ambassadors pay attention. That makes your work unexpectedly diplomatic. An ambassador does not simply record what Elizabeth says during negotiations. He watches how she appears, how richly she is dressed, who receives access, how courtiers behave, how much magnificence surrounds her. Hospitality contributes to the impression of political strength. A poorly supplied court might suggest weakness. An abundant one projects confidence. Whether every visitor believes the message is another question. Some foreign observers find English customs impressive. Others find them strange. Diplomatic reports can be wonderfully sharp because ambassadors are professional watchers, often recording details that flatter nobody. One traveller might admire the abundance. Another might quietly dislike the cooking. History rarely provides universal restaurant reviews. You place preserved fruit onto a serving dish. Its surface catches the light. The sweetness in this room would be astonishing to most ordinary English people. That contrast should not be forgotten. Outside the court, many families live on diets built around bread, grain-based pottage, dairy products, vegetables, ale, and whatever meat or fish they can afford. Food insecurity remains real. Harvest failure can drive prices upward. The 1590s themselves have brought difficult harvests and economic distress to parts of England. Against that background, royal abundance becomes even more striking. The sugar sculpture on your table is not merely beautiful. It represents inequality in concentrated form. Yet no one here asks you to solve that problem. Your task is to make the decoration stand upright. You inspect it. So far, success. There is an amusing uncertainty hidden inside all this magnificence. Written descriptions of spectacular Tudor feasts sometimes tempt later generations to imagine every elite meal as a parade of impossible sculptures and gilded animals. The surviving evidence points instead to considerable variation, occasion, household, expense, season, and purpose all influence how elaborate a display becomes. Tonight's spectacle is special because spectacle is not effortless. Someone has to make it. That someone is currently covered in sugar, you brush your fingers clean. The finished pieces begin moving toward the banqueting space. Marchpane, preserves, comfits, decorated forms. Wine will accompany them. Candles will multiply their shine. Guests will admire what hours of hidden labour have produced. Then, gradually, the sculptures will be cut. The designs will collapse. Gold will vanish into mouths. Sugar will stick to fingers. The edible theatre will destroy itself exactly as intended. And tomorrow, perhaps, nobody will remember the servant who spent half the day making one tiny decorative tower stand straight. You probably will. But before tomorrow comes, another rule of Tudor life is waiting to rearrange the kitchen. Some days, All this meat must disappear from the menu. The fires remain. The hierarchy remains. The hungry household remains. Only now, fish must take centre stage. The change begins before anyone says the word fish. You notice it in what is missing. No great joint turning before the hottest hearth. No capon being trussed nearby. No servant arriving with a haunch of venison. The familiar smells of roasting meat have thinned, replaced by something sharper and cooler. Salt, brine, river water, seaweed clinging faintly to baskets. Today. The kitchen follows another rhythm. It is a fasting day. That does not mean the palace stops eating. Quite the opposite. The fires still burn, the servants still hurry. The queen still expects a table suitable to her rank. Only the rules have changed, in the religious life inherited from medieval England. Certain days traditionally restrict the eating of flesh meat. Fridays, portions of Lent, vigils, and other observances can reshape entire menus. By Elizabeth's reign. England is Protestant, and many older Catholic practices have been altered or rejected. Yet fish days do not simply vanish. They survive for a mixture of religious habit, law, economics, politics, and practical concern for the fishing industry. That makes your job interesting. You're not cooking inside a neat world where the Reformation instantly replaced one set of customs with another. You're cooking in the messy middle. Some habits remain because people are used to them. Some are supported by law, some are defended for economic reasons. And some are followed simply because the household calendar says they are, so you reach for fish. A lot of fish. The royal table can draw from an impressive range. Salmon, pike, carp, bream, sole, turbot, mullet, herring, cod, whiting, eels. Different species carry different associations of price, season, and status. A magnificent pike from a managed pond can look every bit as impressive as a roast bird. Freshwater fish are especially valuable where estates maintain ponds designed to provide reliable supplies. Such ponds are not merely decorative, they are living storerooms. A noble household can raise and hold fish until required. You imagine the convenience with some admiration. A pond does not need salting, it does not need a barrel, it simply waits. Sea fish present another challenge. Distance matters. Fresh fish must move quickly from coast or market to kitchen. The farther it travels, the more preservation matters. Salted cod and herring therefore become enormously important. Preserved fish can survive journeys that fresh fish cannot. You lift a salted piece and smell it. The aroma is powerful. Very powerful. The sort of powerful that makes you reconsider every life choice that brought you close enough to inhale. It needs soaking. Salt preservation saves food by removing moisture and discouraging spoilage. But it also means the cook must manage the resulting intensity. Soaking can draw some of the salt back out. Boiling can soften the flesh. Sauces can restore moisture and balance. You begin to work. Nearby. Another servant cleans an eel. Eels appear constantly in older English food traditions, partly because they are widely available in rivers, marshes, and fisheries. They can be fresh, salted, or otherwise preserved. Their slippery bodies make them notoriously awkward to handle. You watch one nearly escape a servant's grip for a moment. The creature seems determined to return to the river by crossing the kitchen floor. It does not succeed. The servant catches it with an expression suggesting that this has happened before. You turn away politely. There is something almost comforting about knowing that royal kitchens can still be defeated briefly by a determined eel. The Queen's status does not make fish days plain. This is important. A fasting menu for the elite does not necessarily resemble hardship. You can serve multiple fish species, elaborate sauces, pastry dishes, eggs, butter, fruit, bread, wine, and sweet preparations depending on the exact restrictions being observed. In some contexts, dairy products and eggs may be treated differently according to older religious rules, local practice, or dispensation. By 1598, the Protestant English context has further complicated those inherited distinctions. The result is not culinary simplicity, It is adaptation. You prepare a sauce containing wine, spice follows, then a little vinegar, perhaps dried fruit. The flavour is sharp, rich, and warming. Fish does not arrive naked and apologetic. It can be roasted, baked, boiled, fried, stewed, or enclosed in pastry. Pike might be served with a sauce. Eels can become pies. Salmon may be prepared with herbs. Saltfish can be transformed into something much more pleasant than its first smell suggests. The court expects skill. You taste the sauce. Better, a little more sweetness. You add it carefully. The kitchen's fish consumption is also tied to policy. Elizabethan governments periodically support fish days, partly to encourage maritime activity and protect communities dependent on fishing. Eating fish can therefore be framed not merely as a religious discipline, but as a national economic measure. More demand for fish means more work for fishermen. More fishing means more experienced sailors, and experienced sailors matter to an island kingdom, whose security and commerce depend upon the sea. Suddenly your pot of cod has become naval policy. You stare into it. It does not look especially patriotic. Still, the connection is real. Laws enforcing fish consumption appear during Elizabeth's reign. Though motives are mixed and enforcement is uneven, people do not always obey culinary policy enthusiastically. Some resent restrictions, others seek exemptions. The state's desire to shape what people eat meets the stubborn reality that people have preferences. A familiar story, really. Tell a population that something is compulsory and it instantly becomes less delicious. At court, however, the household has to manage whatever regulations and expectations apply. So the fish arrives, the kitchen adapts, and the queen is served. One dish under preparation contains carp. Carp farming has a long history in Europe, and managed ponds make the fish particularly useful to wealthy households. The flesh can be substantial enough to carry rich sauces well. You help arrange the pieces, herbs are added. The smell is now far removed from the raw basket that arrived earlier. That transformation is the cook's victory, not making fish taste like meat, making fish feel complete on its own terms. Elsewhere, pastry is being prepared for another dish. Fish pies can be practical as well as decorative. A firm crust protects the filling. Spices and dried fruit may enter the mixture. The combination would surprise some modern diners. But you no longer find it strange. You have spent enough time here to understand that sweetness, sourness, spice, and savoury richness frequently occupy the same dish. Your palate is changing. Or perhaps your resistance is simply exhausted. The fasting calendar also creates logistical problems. A household that regularly switches between meat and fish requires reliable supplies of both. That means storerooms, contracts, preservation, planning. A cook cannot discover on Friday morning that no one remembered the herring, at least not if the cook wishes to remain popular. Records from great households reveal the enormous quantities involved, but they cannot always tell you how often cooks substituted one species for another when supply failed. A written account may name what was purchased. It does not necessarily preserve the moment when someone stood in a smoky doorway saying, "The salmon never arrived." Those missing moments are where practical cooking lives. You know exactly what happens next. Someone swears quietly. Someone checks the stores. Someone changes the dish. Then everyone pretends the new plan was intentional. The royal table rewards confidence. A servant approaches with a request. Another fish course is needed. You reach for what remains. There is enough. Barely. The fire beside you is gentler than the roasting hearth from yesterday, but the room is no cooler. Steam rises from boiling vessels. Fish stock thickens the air. Wine, spice, pastry, and smoke mix together until the kitchen smells completely different from the meat-heavy day before. The entire household has changed its diet without changing its appetite. That may be the most striking part. Religious history, economic policy, maritime strategy, inherited custom, and royal ceremony all converge in the same room, and you experience them not as abstract forces, but as ingredients. One day beef, another day pike, one day capon, another day eel pie. The calendar enters your hands through food. You wipe them on a cloth. A finished dish is carried away. Another follows. The Queen's table will remain abundant enough that fasting does not look much like deprivation. Still, the principle has shaped everything you have done today, and as the fish disappears toward the royal chambers, another problem begins to press itself upon you. Fresh or salted, river or sea, meat or fish, every ingredient has one enemy that no law can command: time. Food spoils, milk turns, meat darkens, fish becomes dangerous. There is no refrigerator waiting in the corner, and tomorrow you will have to confront the unsettling question that every Tudor cook understands instinctively. How do you keep a palace fed when nearly everything wants to rot? Time is everywhere in the kitchen now, not measured by a clock on the wall, but by smell, by texture, by the colour of meat, by the sourness of milk, by how long a fish has been out of water, by the way a piece of fruit yields beneath your thumb. You begin to understand that one of the royal cook's most important skills has nothing to do with seasoning. It is knowing what can still be trusted. There is no mechanical refrigeration, no sealed plastic packaging, no refrigerated delivery van pulling into the palace courtyard. Food arrives alive, fresh, dried, salted, smoked, pickled, preserved in sugar, stored in cool rooms, packed in barrels, hung in larders, or brought in quantities calculated to be used before spoilage wins. And spoilage is always waiting. You enter a storage area where the temperature is noticeably cooler than beside the hearths. That helps. Thick stone walls can keep interiors relatively stable. Certain rooms are deliberately chosen because they remain cool. Larders are designed for storing meat and other provisions away from the heat of the kitchen. Ventilation matters, shade matters, cleanliness matters, distance from the fire matters. The palace cannot create cold in the modern sense, but it can delay warmth. Sometimes delay is enough. A side of meat hangs from a hook. You inspect it. Colour first, then smell, then texture. You do not need a printed expiration date because your nose is doing the work. Experience teaches you what fresh meat should smell like and what should make you suspicious. The difference can be subtle at first, then very obvious. Once it becomes very obvious, you would prefer not to be holding it. Salt is one of your strongest defences. Meat can be heavily salted so that it lasts far longer than fresh meat. Fish receives the same treatment. The principle is simple, even if you would not describe it scientifically. Salt draws out moisture. Less available moisture makes life harder for the organisms that cause decay. You simply know that salted food keeps. That knowledge is ancient. You also know the cost. Salted meat can become intensely salty and tougher than fresh meat. Preparation may require soaking, boiling, changing the water, combining it with other ingredients. Preservation solves one problem and creates another. You lift the lid from a barrel. The smell of brine rises immediately. Salted beef lies inside. It is not elegant. It is practical. In winter or when fresh supply becomes uncertain, practicality becomes extremely attractive. Smoking offers another method. Meat or fish exposed to smoke dries gradually and absorbs compounds that help preservation. The resulting flavour can be strong and distinctive. You're surrounded by smoke anyway. So perhaps the food has simply decided to accept its fate. Drying works too. Remove enough moisture and many foods remain useful much longer. Peas and beans can be stored dry. Fruit can be dried. Herbs can be dried. Grain, if protected from damp and pests, keeps remarkably well. That last condition is important. Protected from pests. You hear scratching. Very faint. You stop. Listen. There it is again. Somewhere behind a stack of sacks, something small has opinions about royal grain policy. Rats and mice are not impressed by hierarchy. They do not care that the flour belongs to Elizabeth or Elizabethan. They do not recognise household ordinances, they simply smell food. So storage requires constant vigilance. Sacks must be checked, bins inspected, spilled grain cleared, Cats can be useful allies, although their loyalties are based mostly on comfort and rodents rather than devotion to the crown. You spot movement near the wall. A mouse vanishes, very patriotic of it. Insects pose their own problems. Weevils can infest grain. Flies are drawn to meat. Maggots appear where sanitation fails. The kitchen does not possess germ theory, but it absolutely possesses disgust. People understand that foul smells, visible corruption, and contaminated food are dangerous. They may explain the danger differently from you, often through ideas involving putrefaction, bad air, imbalance, or corrupted humours, but they are not blindly eating anything that has turned green. You examine a sack of flour, no obvious infestation. Good. Moisture would be another danger. Damp grain can mould, barrels can leak, cellars can flood, a poorly maintained storeroom can ruin provisions worth a great deal of money. This is why officers responsible for household supplies matter so much. Food security in a palace depends on administration as much as cooking. Someone must know what is in storage, how much remains, what needs ordering, what should be used first, what can last, what is deteriorating. You begin to see something almost modern in the process. Rotation, inventory, inspection, waste control. Only the paperwork is slower and the consequences smell worse. Fruit creates different challenges. Fresh apples and pears can last surprisingly well under good conditions, especially certain varieties stored cool and dry. Others must be eaten quickly. Plums and berries are far more fragile. Sugar helps transform them into preserves. You work beside a pot where fruit has been cooked down into a thick mixture. The high sugar concentration does more than make it luxurious. It also helps preservation. That means one of the court's favourite indulgences has a practical side. Sweetness can extend the season. A fruit harvested weeks or months earlier can return to the table in another form. Vinegar provides another powerful tool. Pickling creates acidic conditions that slow spoilage. Vegetables, fruits, and other foods can be preserved this way. The flavour becomes sharper, sometimes dramatically sharper. You open a vessel and immediately understand why. Your nose retreats before the rest of you does. Effective. Very effective. Fermentation sits somewhere between preservation and transformation. Ale and beer are obvious examples. Cheese is another. Milk that would spoil quickly can become something far more durable once transformed into cheese. Hard cheeses can travel and keep. Butter can be salted. Cream can be processed. Every successful technique buys time, and time is what the household needs. One misconception that future diners will repeat endlessly is that Tudor cooks use strong spices primarily to disguise rotten food. Standing here, the idea seems ridiculous. Imported pepper, cloves, cinnamon, mace, and nutmeg cost too much to waste on meat that should have been thrown away. A wealthy household has more incentive to protect expensive food than to camouflage corruption. Spices may help with flavour and perhaps with preservation in limited ways, but their prestige and culinary value matter far more than any fantasy of routinely masking decay. You would like to invite anyone who believes otherwise to eat genuinely rotten meat with extra cinnamon. The theory would probably end quickly. Water creates another layer of concern. The palace needs enormous quantities. Cooking, washing, brewing, cleaning, drinking, animals. Water may come from wells, conduits, springs, rivers, or supplied systems depending on the residence. Some sources are cleaner than others. Urban water can become contaminated by waste, even when nobody understands bacteria. People recognise that certain water tastes or smells bad. Elizabethan London, in particular, has increasingly sophisticated systems bringing water from springs and conduits, though access and quality vary. The royal household enjoys advantages ordinary people may not. Still, you do not assume every bucket is pure. Boiling water during cooking reduces risks accidentally, even if you would not describe the process that way. Brewing does something similar. You carry a bucket toward a work table and set it down carefully. The water looks clear. Clear is reassuring, not a guarantee. Food safety is like that here. You rarely possess certainty. You possess judgment. A fish may look good and still be dangerous. A preserved food may fail. A barrel may have been badly sealed. A servant may neglect cleaning. A supplier may deliver something older than claimed. The palace relies on layers of caution rather than one perfect safeguard. There is also the problem of leftovers. A royal meal produces them inevitably. Some food is redistributed. Some can be reused in later preparations. Bread can become crumbs or thicken sauces. Meat can be incorporated into pies or dishes if it remains sound, but every reuse extends the time between cooking and eating. That makes judgment even more important. Surviving household accounts record purchases, quantities, and expenditures in impressive detail. Yet they rarely preserve the tiny decisions made over a questionable bowl the following morning. That missing layer makes it difficult to know exactly how aggressively Tudor cooks reused leftovers in every circumstance. You can imagine the answer changing according to smell, season, rank, and necessity. A wealthy kitchen can discard more than a poor household, but waste still costs money. You inspect yesterday's bread, harder now, still useful. Into crumbs it goes, nothing dramatic, just sensible. You begin cleaning the work surface. Hot water helps, scraping helps, sand, ash, cloth, brushes, and physical effort all contribute to keeping equipment usable. The standards are not modern laboratory sanitation, but neither is the kitchen simply coated permanently in filth. A functioning royal kitchen must be cleaned because grease, scraps, insects, and rot interfere with work. Dirty equipment also produces bad flavours. Professional pride matters. You scrub a vessel until your arms ache. Somewhere nearby, another servant is doing the same. The palace depends on this invisible labour almost as much as it depends on the cooking itself. By now, you can smell the room differently. Not merely smoke and meat. You notice warning signs, sourness, dampness, stale grease, old fish. Your senses are becoming part of the palace's defence, and that defence can never rest. Tomorrow's ingredients are already aging. The next barrel is already vulnerable. The next piece of meat has already begun its journey toward decay from the moment the animal was slaughtered. You wash your hands, dry them. Then look toward the preparations waiting for the Queen. Keeping food safe is difficult enough, but in 1598, safety is only one concern. A dish must also suit the body as physicians understand it. Hot foods, cold foods, dry foods, moist foods. Digestion itself is about to become another kind of kitchen rule. The next instruction does not come from a cook. It comes from someone who thinks about the body. That means your ingredients are about to become medical. A physician's recommendation can change a dish before it ever reaches the Queen. Certain foods may be considered warming, others cooling. Some are thought to dry the body. Others add moisture. Digestion itself is understood through a framework that feels strange to you now, but entirely reasonable to the people around you. The theory reaches back through classical medicine. Human health is associated with 4 humours blood: phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each is connected with qualities such as heat, cold, moisture, and dryness. The goal is balance. Food can disturb that balance. Food can also help restore it. So your kitchen does not merely feed Elizabeth, it participates, indirectly. In maintaining the monarch's health, you receive instructions concerning a lighter preparation. Perhaps the Queen has slept poorly. Perhaps she has complained of discomfort. Perhaps the physician simply believes that today's meals should be less heavy. You do not need the diagnosis. You need the practical consequence. The rich sauce is reduced. A different broth is prepared. An ingredient disappears. Another takes its place. This is where cookery and medicine overlap. In 16th century thinking, digestion is often imagined as a kind of internal cooking process. The stomach uses natural heat to transform food. A meal that is too difficult to digest can burden this process. Foods may therefore be judged not only by flavour, but by how easily the body is expected to manage them. Age matters, season matters, individual constitution matters, time of day matters, even the weather can matter. You can see why royal physicians remain busy. There is always something to classify. A young, vigorous person may be advised differently from an older person. Elizabeth is 65. That makes restraint increasingly sensible. You prepare a broth. The liquid simmers rather than boils violently. A small amount of meat gives body. Herbs add flavour. Bread might be used to thicken it. Perhaps an egg is incorporated carefully. The dish is nourishing without being overwhelming. You find the quiet simplicity pleasant after the excess of banquet sugar. Not everything royal needs to glitter. A physician might approve. Then again, another physician might disagree. Medicine here is not one perfectly unified system. Practitioners share broad assumptions, but interpretation varies. One person may consider a food suitable for a particular constitution, while another recommends caution. Advice also shifts according to circumstance. The same wine that is praised in one moment may be discouraged in another. That gives the kitchen a familiar problem. Experts can issue different instructions while expecting the cook to produce dinner anyway. You suspect this tradition will survive for centuries. Herbs occupy an interesting place between culinary and medicinal use. Sage, rosemary, mint, parsley, thyme, hyssop, various roots, seeds, flowers, and leaves can appear in food, remedies, cordials, syrups, and household medicine. The boundary between kitchen ingredient and treatment is often porous. You crush a little herb between your fingers, its aroma rises immediately, fresh, green, sharp enough to cut through the heaviness of the room. You add it sparingly. Too much turns medicine into punishment, or perhaps punishment into medicine. The distinction is not always obvious. Spices carry medical qualities too. Pepper may be considered hot and dry. Ginger likewise has warming associations. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and mace can be understood through similar classifications. Their presence in food is therefore not just about luxury. They can also be interpreted as helping digestion or correcting the qualities of other ingredients. A cold food may be paired with a warming spice. A moist food may be balanced with something thought to dry. The recipe becomes a miniature argument about the body. You taste the broth, warm but not aggressive. Good. One particularly charming belief involves the order in which foods should be eaten. Digestibility matters, and some medical writers recommend beginning meals with foods thought to open the stomach or prepare digestion, then proceeding through heavier dishes in a rational sequence. Fruit causes endless complication. Some fruits are considered cooling, others moistening. Certain physicians warn against eating particular fruits raw. Others accept them under the right conditions. Melons can inspire especially nervous advice because they are regarded as very cold and moist, if served. They may be paired with wine or warming seasonings to correct the supposed imbalance. So even a slice of melon can become medically complicated. You look toward a bowl of fruit. It suddenly seems far more dangerous than it did yesterday. Not because anyone believes it will poison you, because it might make your internal qualities disagree with one another. There is almost something peaceful about the system when viewed from a distance. Everything has a nature. Everything has a place. Hot balances cold. Dry balances moist. Food and body are linked. The difficulty begins when real people refuse to behave neatly. Elizabeth may want a sweet dish that her physician considers unsuitable. A courtier may ignore advice. A servant may eat whatever is available because philosophical balance is less urgent than hunger. And medical guidance itself is filtered through status. The Queen has access to learned physicians, apothecaries, expensive remedies, imported ingredients, and attendants who can modify her diet. A poor labourer cannot simply request a specially balanced broth because his digestion feels slightly unsettled. Your kitchen therefore reveals another form of privilege. Health advice becomes practical only when someone has resources to follow it. A small dish of preserved fruit is requested. You hesitate because sugar has already appeared frequently today. Yet sugar itself occupies a curious medical position. It can be used in syrups, conserves, lozenges, and medicinal preparations. Sweetness helps preserve herbs and fruits. It also makes unpleasant remedies easier to swallow. Apothecaries and cooks share techniques. The same sugar that builds decorative banqueting sculptures can carry medicine. This is not a contradiction to your colleagues. Food and physic belong to overlapping worlds. You prepare the preserve. A little goes a long way. The Queen's dental problems, whatever their exact severity, make hard or sticky sweets increasingly questionable choices as she ages. Later descriptions of her mouth are sometimes dramatic, and hostile observers may exaggerate physical decline because the aging body of a monarch offers irresistible material for political gossip. Still, difficulty with teeth would naturally shape what she can comfortably eat. Soft foods become more attractive. Broths, custards, cooked fruits, tender meat. Something requiring heroic chewing becomes less desirable. You imagine presenting an elderly queen with a rock-hard crust and calling it therapeutic. Your career would probably become very brief. Wine enters medical thinking as well. Taken moderately, certain wines may be described as strengthening, warming, or aiding digestion. Excess is another matter. The ideal is controlled consumption. That sounds familiar enough. What changes is the explanation. Instead of discussing liver damage or blood alcohol levels, people speak about heat, moisture, constitution, and balance. The advice may occasionally land on a sensible outcome through a very different route. That is one of the most interesting things about this kitchen. Some practices work. The explanation for why they work may not. Broth can indeed be easier to consume when someone is ill. Clean preparation matters. Moderation matters. Soft food does help someone with poor teeth. None of those observations requires knowledge of bacteria, vitamins, or modern physiology. Experience accumulates even inside an inaccurate theoretical system. You stir another pot and think about how much knowledge here comes from watching bodies over time. People notice that certain foods upset certain stomachs. They notice that age changes appetite. They notice that illness reduces tolerance for rich meals. They notice that spoiled food causes trouble. The conclusions may be framed through humours, but the observations are often real. A more peculiar remedy waits nearby in the form of spices steeped in wine. Cordials and medicinal drinks can contain herbs, sugar, alcohol, seeds, roots, and aromatic ingredients. Some recipes sound pleasant. Others sound like a dare. You are grateful that tonight you only have to prepare food. The physician passes another instruction through a servant. Less spice, you adjust. No complaint. The kitchen is flexible because it has to be. Royal appetite changes. Medical advice changes. Supplies change. The cook translates all of that into something edible. That is your real skill. Not following one fixed recipe. Adapting without making the adaptation visible. The broth is finished. It leaves the kitchen. You watch it go with far less ceremony than the banquet sculpture, but perhaps greater importance. A sugar castle can impress an ambassador. A suitable meal can help the queen get through a difficult day. Above you, medicine and monarchy meet quietly over a bowl, and already another disruption is approaching. The palace itself will not always stay still. Soon the queen may leave these familiar walls, and when she does, the kitchen must somehow follow her. Pots, knives, servants, spices, bread, wine, meat, everything. Your entire working world is about to be packed onto the road. The first sign of trouble is not a fire, it is a trunk, then another, then a stack of baskets, then rolls of cloth, wooden chests, iron cooking gear, barrels, sacks, and enough household equipment to make you wonder whether the palace has decided to move itself one room at a time. The Queen is going on progress, and that means you're going too. Elizabeth's summer progresses are among the most distinctive features of her reign, instead of remaining permanently in one royal residence. She travels through parts of England with a substantial household, staying at royal houses and the estates of nobles who are expected to receive her. For courtiers, this can mean ceremony, opportunity, and access. For a cook, it means packing. You look around the kitchen and begin deciding what cannot be left behind. Knives, spits, pans, mortars, utensils, containers, cloths, seasonings. Some equipment may already exist at the residence ahead. Some may not. Some local kitchens may be excellent. Others may have the charm and efficiency of a damp shed with aspirations. You have to prepare for both. The road itself changes everything. At a fixed palace, stores can accumulate. Fuel supplies are known. Water sources are familiar. You know where the larder is. You know which hearth draws badly. You know which servant hides the good ladle. Travel removes all that confidence. Now ingredients, servants, equipment, and information must move together. The royal household can stretch across roads in a long procession. Horses, carts, pack animals, officials, guards, servants, ladies and gentlemen, clerks, musicians, kitchen workers, luggage, documents, plate, clothing, bedding, food. The Queen does not travel lightly. You help secure a chest. It is heavier than it looks. Naturally, royal convenience is often built from servant back pain. The progress has political value as well as practical inconvenience. Elizabeth can show herself to subjects, reward hosts with her presence, inspect parts of the realm indirectly, and maintain relationships with important nobles. A visit from the Queen is an honour. It can also be financially terrifying. The host must provide accommodation, entertainment, food, servants, horses, fuel, and display suitable to royal expectations. One estate may spend months preparing. Walls are repaired, rooms decorated, temporary structures built, food accumulated, entertainment rehearsed, and then several hundred people arrive hungry. You almost feel sorry for the host. Almost. Then you remember you will be working in his kitchen. The carts begin to move. Wheels sink slightly into soft ground. Dust rises where the road is dry. England in 1598 has no modern highway network. Travel depends on roads that vary dramatically in quality. Rain can turn them into mud. Ruts can jar wheels. Bridges may be narrow. Progress slows. A journey that looks short on a modern map can consume hours. Food does not enjoy this. Fresh fish especially has little patience for delayed transport. Milk has even less. So local supply becomes crucial. The household cannot carry every ingredient for an entire progress. Instead, advance officers and local suppliers help arrange provisions along the route. Animals can be driven, grain purchased, bread baked locally, fish sourced nearby, fruit and vegetables gathered according to season. Wine and expensive goods may travel with the household or be arranged through merchants. The royal kitchen becomes partly portable and partly dependent on whatever landscape receives it. You arrive at the first stopping place tired, dusty, and already behind schedule. The kitchen is unfamiliar. That is the worst part. You step inside and immediately assess it. Hearth, oven, tables, water, storage, ventilation, fuel, space. Nothing is where your hands expect it to be. A cook beside you opens a cupboard and finds almost nothing useful. He closes it again slowly, as though giving the cupboard an opportunity to reconsider. It does not. So, improvisation begins. A local servant explains where more vessels are stored. Another brings wood. Someone checks the well. Someone else starts unpacking spices. Within minutes, the strange kitchen starts becoming yours. This ability matters more than any single recipe. A royal progress requires cooks who can recreate consistency in changing conditions. The Queen may move, the building may change, the fire may behave differently, but the food must still look controlled. Court magnificence cannot appear surprised by geography. You test the oven, too hot on one side, Good to know. The hearth draws reasonably well. Better. Water arrives. Clear enough. A local supplier brings poultry. You inspect it. Acceptable. Another arrives with vegetables. Some are excellent. Some are less impressive. You take what can be used. There is little room for idealism on the road. One of the strangest burdens falls on the host household. When Elizabeth visits a noble residence, enormous consumption can leave lasting financial scars. Later, tradition sometimes tells stories of hosts nearly ruined by royal visits, and while the most dramatic versions can exaggerate for effect, the underlying expense is genuine. Feeding the court is only part of it. There are gifts, entertainment, accommodation, extra servants, repairs, temporary buildings, horse fodder, lighting, fuel. Every hour of royal presence costs money. You begin to see the progress from two directions. For Elizabeth, it is monarchy in motion. For the host, it is a very elegant natural disaster. The dinner preparations begin. A messenger arrives from the household officers. Numbers have changed. Of course they have. More guests will dine. You increase quantities. A sauce is stretched. More bread is requested. Another bird is added. The local kitchen staff watch your methods carefully. Some may admire the efficiency. Others probably resent the invasion. You're taking over their workspace, using their fuel, demanding their supplies, and expecting speed. There is likely tension beneath the politeness. Yet information flows both ways. Local cooks know the oven. They know which well tastes best. They know which butcher is reliable. They know what produce is good this week. You know royal expectations. Together, reluctantly or otherwise, you make the meal happen. This exchange is one of the quieter consequences of court travel. Recipes, tastes, fashions, serving habits, and ingredients move with people. A noble household exposed to royal cooking may adopt elements of it later. A cook may see a new technique. A servant may carry an idea elsewhere. The progress spreads culture as well as expense. Not every detail of these travelling kitchens survives clearly enough to reconstruct the arrangement at every stop. Accounts can show provisions and costs, while household regulations describe responsibilities. But the actual improvisation inside temporary kitchens disappears almost entirely. You can feel where the missing information belongs. Someone had to decide where to hang the pots. Someone discovered the oven-burned pastry on the left. Someone found extra salt when the expected supply failed. Someone stayed awake later than planned because the Queen's schedule shifted. History remembers the arrival. You remember the washing up. Night approaches. The unfamiliar kitchen is still warm. Tomorrow you may pack again. Or perhaps the court remains for several days, giving you just enough time to learn the building before leaving it. You lie down eventually in quarters that feel temporary because they are. Your body still seems to move with the road, in the darkness. You can hear servants nearby. A horse stamps somewhere outside. A cart creaks. The whole court feels restless even when sleeping, and when morning comes. The Queen's progress will continue through another estate, another kitchen, another set of local suppliers. By now you understand that royal cooking is not tied to one magnificent palace. It follows power wherever power chooses to go. And wherever Elizabeth travels, politics travels with her. Soon you will discover that the dining table itself can become a battlefield of courtesy, access, rivalry, and negotiation, all conducted with smiles while someone quietly watches who receives the better seat. By now, you have learned not to trust a dining room simply because everyone inside it is smiling. The table may be covered with linen, candles may burn steadily, silver may shine, servants may move with practiced calm. But beneath the polished surface, the room can be as carefully contested as any council chamber. A meal at court is never only a meal. Who sits near the Queen matters, who is invited matters, who is ignored matters, who receives attention from Elizabeth matters even more. You stand at the edge of the service route and watch Dij move toward the room. The kitchen has already done its work. Now food becomes political, A nobleman may spend weeks trying to secure access to the Queen. An ambassador may wait for the right moment to raise a delicate subject. A courtier may hope that one favourable glance from Elizabeth will improve his prospects. The dining space becomes a theatre of opportunity. You can almost feel the calculation from the corridor. One man speaks pleasantly while watching another. A lady laughs at exactly the right moment. An ambassador studies the seating arrangement. A servant appears with wine. Nothing looks dangerous. That is what makes it interesting. At Elizabeth's court, proximity to the monarch can carry enormous value. Royal favour affects offices, patronage, pensions, influence, marriage prospects, access to land, and political standing. So physical nearness is rarely neutral. The people closest to Elizabeth are not merely closer to her chair, they are closer to power. You carry a dish toward the handoff point. Someone checks where it belongs. Wrong table, wrong rank, wrong implication. The distinction feels excessive until you understand the culture of precedence. Noble titles have order. Household offices have order. Foreign ambassadors care intensely about precedence because seating can suggest the relative standing of their rulers. Two representatives from rival states may become deeply offended over who enters first, who sits higher, or whose chair is positioned closer to the Queen. You would like to believe grown adults entrusted with international diplomacy are above arguing about chairs. You would be wrong. Court ceremony gives chairs geopolitical significance. That may be one of the strangest things you've learned all day. A servant adjusts a place setting. The movement is tiny. The consequence might not be. Elizabeth herself understands ceremonial politics exceptionally well. She has spent 4 decades balancing competing factions, foreign threats, religious divisions, marriage negotiations, and ambitious courtiers. She often uses access as a tool. A person may be received warmly one day and kept waiting the next. A request can be encouraged without being granted. A courtier can be allowed to believe favour is possible without ever being given certainty. The Queen's ability to delay decisions becomes part of her political method. You suspect she could teach an entire generation how to answer a question without technically answering it. Perhaps she already has. The table supports this style of rule, during meals or the ceremonies surrounding them. Elizabeth can observe people in an environment that appears social rather than formal, who speaks too eagerly, who avoids someone who seems nervous, who is trying too hard. Court life offers endless information to anyone patient enough to watch. And Elizabeth has had decades to practice. Food helps create the setting. A diplomatic guest is not merely offered calories. He is shown hospitality. A richly supplied table communicates resources. Imported wine suggests trade connections. Spices imply access to distant markets. Fine plate signals wealth. Game suggests aristocratic privilege. The sheer number of servants indicates organizational capacity. Everything tells a story about the crown. You are part of that story without ever speaking to the ambassador. A dish can make a political argument before anyone opens his mouth. That argument usually says England is orderly, prosperous, and capable. Whether the visitor believes it is another matter. Foreign envoys are trained to look beyond appearances. Their reports may describe the Queen's clothing, health, mood, entourage, ceremonial habits, and conversations in remarkable detail. They notice weakness because that is their job. If Elizabeth appears tired, someone records it. If factional tension becomes visible, someone notices. If the table seems unusually grand, that too may become evidence. The court knows it is being watched, so spectacle becomes defensive. You polish a serving edge with a cloth. No stain should remain. Hospitality must look effortless. That is one of the great tricks of palace life. The more effort something requires, the more important it is that nobody sees the effort. You remember the sugar work, hours of heat, pounding, shaping, and careful decoration transformed into a few minutes of admiration. Politics works similarly. Weeks of negotiation may be hidden beneath one apparently casual dinner. A gift can complicate matters further. Gift exchange is woven deeply into court culture. New Year's gifts are especially important in Elizabeth's reign. But presents circulate on many occasions: jewels, plate, clothing, books, food, exotic objects. A gift is not simply generosity. It can acknowledge status, seek favour, display loyalty, or advertise wealth. Receiving one creates social meaning. Giving one creates expectation. Even refusing one may speak loudly. Food itself can serve as a gift. A noble household might send venison, fruit, preserves, game, or some prized local product. The item says more than "please enjoy this." It says "remember me." The Queen's response matters if she accepts warmly. The giver may feel encouraged. If the gift disappears without comment, perhaps less so, you begin to think politics would be easier if everyone simply said what they wanted. Then you remember you're in a royal court and abandon the idea immediately. A dispute at one end of the room remains carefully hidden beneath manners. Two courtiers are competing for influence. You cannot hear the details. You do not need to. Their bodies tell enough. One leans closer when the Queen speaks. The other watches. A laugh follows. Then a pause. Another dish enters. The moment dissolves. Food is useful that way. It provides interruption. It gives everyone something to do with their hands. A tense conversation can stop for carving. A difficult question can wait while wine is poured. A host can redirect attention toward a spectacle. The kitchen supplies small escapes from political discomfort. A particularly elaborate dish may even be designed around a diplomatic occasion. Symbols can be chosen deliberately. A heraldic emblem might honour a guest. A confection could celebrate peace. A figure drawn from classical mythology might flatter Elizabeth while sending a message about virtue or strength. The intended meaning is not always perfectly recoverable centuries later. Descriptions survive unevenly. And court entertainments often rely on references that were obvious to educated spectators at the time, but less transparent now. You would not have that problem. You see the faces. You watch who smiles at the symbolism. You notice who does not. There is information there. Seating offers another layer of interpretation. Formal precedence is governed by rank, but real court life is flexible enough to produce friction. Rooms differ. Guest lists change. Foreign representatives carry competing claims. Royal preference can disrupt expectation. One person may be technically entitled to one position, but find that circumstance creates another arrangement. Nobody likes losing status in public, so even a well-planned meal can require delicate management. The servants know this. They may not decide the hierarchy, but they have to enact it. Place the wrong person incorrectly and the mistake becomes visible. You start to understand why service is so controlled. Precision is not fussiness. Precision prevents embarrassment. The meal continues. The Queen speaks with an ambassador. You catch only fragments. France, Spain, trade. Nothing complete. Yet in 1598, foreign affairs are especially complicated. England has spent years at war with Spain. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 is already part of national memory. But the conflict did not simply end there. War continues in various forms. Ireland is increasingly consuming attention and resources. France has experienced religious conflict. The Netherlands remains central to English strategic concerns. Every diplomatic conversation sits inside this unstable landscape, and still dinner has to be served. You find that oddly reassuring. History books often compress decades into treaties, battles, and succession crises. Here, events unfolded between mouthfuls. Someone asks for more wine. Someone drops a spoon. An ambassador waits while a servant changes a platter. A political calculation is interrupted by sauce. This is how power actually lives. Not permanently dramatic. Mostly procedural, mostly social, mostly waiting, then, occasionally, decisive. One later story about Elizabethan diplomacy describes the Queen's ability to use flirtation, charm, temper, an ambiguity to keep foreign envoys uncertain about her intentions. The stories vary in reliability, especially when filtered through men who may misunderstand or resent her methods. But the broader pattern fits a ruler highly skilled at turning personal performance into political leverage. At dinner, that skill is especially visible. She can be gracious without promising anything, warm without yielding, amused without agreeing. You admire the efficiency. No recipe in your kitchen is that subtle. Eventually, the dishes begin returning. Some are empty, some barely touched. The political theatre is winding down. Guests rise according to order. Servants clear. Conversations migrate elsewhere. The room loses its tension gradually. You carry the remains back toward the kitchen. There, the politics become scraps again. A half-carved bird, bread, sauce, bones, used cloth. The grand machinery returns to physical reality, and so do you. Your feet hurt. Your back is stiff. Your hands smell of smoke, fat, vinegar, and metal above stairs. People compete for favour below stairs. You're beginning to feel the simpler truth of royal service. Power may dine elegantly. Someone still has to wash the dishes. And before this long day ends, you're going to feel exactly what that labour cost the people who keep Elizabeth's court alive. By the time the grand rooms begin to quiet, your body has already formed its own opinion about royal service. Your feet ache first, then your shoulders, then your hands. The heat you barely noticed during the rush now seems to cling to your skin. Smoke has settled into your hair and clothes. Grease has found every fold in the fabric. Your palms are rough from handles, knives, wood, cloth, and constant washing. Nothing about this feels noble. You serve a queen. But your working day is built from repetition. Lift, carry, cut, stir, turn, scrub, fetch, return. Do it again. That rhythm is the hidden foundation of court magnificence. Upstairs, silk rustles and silver shines. Down here, someone is scraping hardened fat from a pan. The contrast would be funny if your back hurt less. You lower yourself briefly onto a wooden stool. Only briefly. Sitting too long is risky because someone will always find another task. A servant passes with a bucket. Another follows with dirty cloths. The kitchen boys look younger now that the pace has slowed. During service, everyone becomes part of the machinery. Afterward, tired faces reappear. Some of these boys may be apprentices or junior servants learning through work. There is no formal culinary school waiting for them. Skill is absorbed from older workers. Watch how the joint is tied. Watch how the sauce thickens. Watch how the knife is held. Then try. Fail. Try again. Eventually, what once required concentration becomes habit. That apprenticeship can be harsh. The household is hierarchical, and discipline is accepted as part of service. A younger worker who is slow, careless, or insolent may be shouted at. Fines, loss of privileges, dismissal, or corporal punishment can exist within the broader culture of early modern service, although actual practice varies by household, offence, rank, and supervisor. The kitchen has no human resources department. There is no anonymous workplace survey. If the master cook thinks you have ruined a valuable dish, you will know immediately. You probably will not receive the feedback in a calm quarterly review. Still, the relationship between servants is not only punitive. People spend too many hours together for that. Friendships form, jokes survive, grudges survive even better. Someone lends you a cloth without being asked. Another worker saves a better piece of bread for a friend. A senior servant quietly shows a younger one how to repair a mistake before an officer notices. That kind of solidarity rarely appears in formal household accounts. It leaves almost no paperwork, yet without it, the kitchen would be unbearable. You stand again. Your brief rest is over. A tub needs moving as you lift one side. Another servant takes the opposite handle. Neither of you speaks. You do not need to. The shared effort is enough. Your wages alone do not define your livelihood. Service in a great household can include food, lodging, clothing, allowances, tips. customary leftovers, and opportunities for advancement. Exactly what you receive depends on your position. A senior kitchen officer may enjoy a respectable status and better compensation. A boy turning spits occupies another world entirely. The distance between them is enormous, even though both work near the same fire. Royal service can also carry prestige outside the palace. To say that you work in the Queen's household means something. You're connected, however indirectly. To the court, that connection can help build reputation. A skilled cook might later find employment in another aristocratic household. Contacts matter. Recommendations matter. A royal association sounds impressive. You imagine telling someone back home that you cook for Elizabeth herself. You would probably omit the part where you spend hours cleaning grease from iron. Prestige works best from a distance. Housing is another reminder that rank follows you even after work. Some servants sleep within or near the palace complex. Others may lodge in crowded rooms. Privacy is limited. Beds can be shared or spaces communal depending on status and arrangement. The modern idea of finishing work and retreating to a completely separate private life does not fit easily here. Your employer's household may also be your home. You eat there, sleep there, work there. Your colleagues surround you nearly all the time. That closeness can create community. It can also make escape difficult. If you have argued with someone at midday, you may discover that he sleeps 3 feet away. A wonderfully efficient system for keeping resentment warm overnight. The day itself is long. Kitchen labour begins early because preparation must precede service. It ends late because cleaning follows service and tomorrow's work often begins tonight. There is no universal schedule that applies to every worker at every royal residence, but the demands of a large household make extended hours unavoidable. Season changes the experience. Winter brings cold journeys for water and supplies. Yet the hearth may be almost comforting. Summer turns the kitchen into a furnace. Imagine standing before a large fire while the weather outside is already warm. Sweat runs down your back. Clothing sticks to you. You drink, then continue. There's nowhere else for the roast to go. Injury is common enough to be part of your mental landscape. Minor cuts, burns, strains, bruised fingers, a slipped foot, a heavy pot landing badly. You treat many small problems yourself. A cloth around a cut, cool water for a burn, herbal salves, rest. If you're lucky, serious injury is another matter. There is no modern emergency medicine. A deep wound can become infected. A burn can worsen. A broken bone may never heal perfectly. You work carefully, not because someone has taught occupational safety regulations, but because the consequences of carelessness are obvious. That caution shapes how experienced workers move. They do not rush blindly. They rush efficiently. There is a difference. The older cook beside you seems almost slow until you notice that he wastes no motion. He reaches for the correct tool without looking. He knows which handle is hot. He knows when someone is passing behind him. Years of repetition have turned danger into choreography. You imitate him. Not perfectly, but better than you did this morning. One aspect of palace service remains difficult to measure precisely because the records favour officers, expenditures, regulations, and major events over ordinary emotional life. You can find names in accounts, wages, allowances, purchases, occasionally punishments. What is harder to recover is whether a particular scullion loved his work, hated it, feared his superior, or laughed every evening with the person beside him. Those lives survive mostly in fragments, yet the conditions give you clues. People complain, people adapt, people form loyalties, people dream of better positions. Some stay for years, others leave. Some may take pride in serving the crown, others probably think mainly about supper. You know which category you belong to tonight. Your own food finally appears, nothing elaborate, bread, perhaps some meat or pottage, ale. You eat quickly, after preparing dishes filled with costly spice and sugar. Your own meal feels almost plain, but hunger makes it excellent. The first bite is better than half the decorative food you handled earlier. There is no ceremony, no carved silver, no ambassador watching, just tired workers eating. Conversation begins carefully, then loosens. Someone imitates an officious steward. A few people laugh. Another tells a story about the eel that tried to escape. That gets more laughter. You remember it too. For several minutes, rank seems less oppressive. Not gone, just softened by fatigue. This is where the court feels most human. Not when Elizabeth enters a chamber covered in jewels. Here, on a bench, with aching servants laughing over an eel. Then a senior figure walks past and everyone becomes slightly more respectable. The moment ends. You finish your bread. Back to work. The last pots need cleaning. Fuel must be checked. Stores secured. Knives put away. Tomorrow's provisions considered. Royal service does not conclude with the Queen's final bite. The palace continues behind her. Your hands enter warm wash water again. Grease rises from a pan. You scrub. Outside. Darkness has settled fully. Inside. The fires are finally beginning to shrink. The day is not finished yet, but for the first time you can sense its end approaching. Soon there will be supper, then leftovers, then inventory, then the slow extinguishing of the hearths, and after everything you have carried, cut, roasted, washed, and endured, the palace will ask you for one final effort before it allows you to sleep. The last great surge of the day arrives without much ceremony. Supper by now. You've been awake so long that morning feels as though it belonged to somebody else. The first fires before sunrise, the deliveries, the roasting spits. Dinner, sugarwork, fish, physicians, courtiers, ambassadors. All of it has passed through your hands in one form or another, and still the household is not finished eating. Supper is generally lighter than the principal dinner, but lighter is a relative word inside a royal palace. There may still be meat, cold dishes, poultry, bread, cheese, fruit, leftovers transformed into something useful. Wine and ale continue to move through the household. Elizabeth herself may eat according to appetite, health, schedule, and whatever demands the court has placed upon her that day, for you. The important fact is simpler. Food must appear again. You uncover a dish prepared from meat left from earlier service. Nothing smells questionable. Good. Cooked food that remains sound can be redirected rather than discarded automatically. A piece of roast may be served cold, sliced, incorporated into another preparation, or paired with sauce. Bread that has hardened slightly remains useful too. Yesterday you turned old bread into crumbs. Tonight it may thicken something. The royal household produces abundance, but abundance does not require pretending that every leftover becomes worthless the moment a nobleman stops looking at it. You slice carefully. The knife moves more slowly now. Your hands are tired. Everyone's are. The kitchen sounds different at this hour. Earlier, voices competed with roaring fires and pounding mortars. Now there are longer gaps. A knife touches a board. A pot shifts. Someone coughs. Then quiet returns for several seconds. The workers are conserving energy without admitting it. You know the feeling. Even sarcasm requires strength. A servant carries bread toward another department. You watch him disappear through the doorway and find yourself wondering how many miles he has walked today without ever leaving the palace. Probably enough to make a modern fitness tracker unbearably pleased with him. The remaining fires glow lower. Only those needed for supper are maintained strongly. Fuel is valuable, so nobody keeps enormous hearths roaring merely because the flames look beautiful. Wood has to be cut, transported, stored, carried inside, and paid for. A royal kitchen consumes formidable quantities of it. The heat that cooked the Queen's meals began somewhere in a woodland or managed estate, followed by axes, carts, labour, and accounting before reaching your hearth. Nothing in this palace is truly simple. Even a flame has a supply chain. You add a small log, sparks lift briefly. Nearby, a pot contains a warm preparation suitable for the evening. Rich food may be avoided late in the day depending on preference and medical thinking. since heavy meals are often associated with difficult digestion and poor sleep. Of course, people still eat richly when they feel like it. Humanity has always possessed an extraordinary ability to understand dietary advice and then order dessert. Elizabeth's household is no exception. A sweet dish remains available. Preserved fruit sits nearby. There is cheese as well. The smell is strong but pleasant. Some cheeses are eaten relatively fresh, while harder varieties keep longer and travel better. Their appearance at supper makes practical sense. Bread, cheese, drink, and remnants from larger preparations can feed people efficiently without restarting the entire midday culinary campaign. The Queen's own table remains more refined, but farther down the hierarchy, practicality increasingly wins. Then one of the returned dishes arrives. You recognize it. Earlier, it went upstairs looking immaculate. Now only fragments remain. A servant sets it down. What happens next depends on what the food is, how long it has stood, who handled it, and what customary rights apply to the remnants. Some portions may pass to lower tables. Some may belong as perquisites to particular officers or servants. Some are no longer worth saving. You do not apply one rule blindly. You inspect, smell, consider. This piece remains good. That one has spent too long sitting warm. Discard it. Your judgment matters even when the Queen has finished with the plate. Leftovers lead into another essential evening ritual, counting. The kitchen has used meat, spice, flour, butter, eggs, wine, sugar, salt, fuel, and countless smaller supplies. Tomorrow requires more. Someone needs to know what remains. You enter the storeroom with an officer. The air is cooler. Barrels stand in shadow. Sacks are checked. Containers opened. A candle provides limited light. You count quantities allowed. Flour. Enough for the morning, though more will be needed. Salt. Adequate. Spice. Closely watched because of its expense. Sugar. Lower than expected. Someone will note it. Butter. Use soon. Wine belongs under the supervision of its proper officers, as do other specialized supplies, but the principle repeats throughout the household. Inventory is continuous. Royal abundance depends upon paperwork almost as much as farmland. The image is wonderfully unromantic. Elizabeth may appear in portraits surrounded by pearls, crowns, celestial symbols, and magnificent textiles. Behind that image stands a tired man counting onions by candlelight. Monarchy rests on surprisingly many onions. You help shift a sack away from damp stone. Storage conditions still matter. The lesson from the larder has not disappeared simply because night has arrived. Keep grain dry. Protect expensive goods. Watch for pests. Use vulnerable food first. The routine resembles memory turned into procedure. A rustling sound makes you glance toward a corner. Nothing visible. Perhaps a mouse. Perhaps merely a sack settling. Either way, you make a mental note. The palace may sleep soon. Its rodents are under no such obligation. Back in the kitchen. Cleaning has begun in earnest. Large vessels are emptied. Grease is scraped away. Tables are scrubbed. Knives are cleaned, dried, and stored rather than abandoned wet. Iron needs care. Copper vessels must not be treated carelessly. Cloths are gathered. Ashes shifted. Bones and usable scraps are separated from true waste. The floor receives attention last because everything has spent the day falling onto it. Water becomes grey quickly. Another bucket arrives. You scrub. Your shoulders complain immediately. You ignore them. This work will not appear in any portrait of royal dining. That does not make it optional. A dirty kitchen tomorrow morning means today's tiredness has simply been converted into tomorrow's disaster. So you clean now. Whispers begin once the senior officers move farther away. Someone mentions a courtier. Another has heard that the Queen was displeased during the afternoon. A third claims to know why an ambassador left one chamber looking irritated. No one can prove much of anything. Below-stairs gossip travels remarkably fast because servants move between rooms that important people imagine to be separate worlds. A plate carrier hears part of a conversation. A gentleman's servant hears another, A kitchen worker notices which meal returns untouched. Small observations accumulate by evening. The household has built its own unofficial version of the day's politics. Whether any of it is true is another matter. One deliciously persistent feature of court life is rumour itself, diaries, letters, diplomatic correspondence, and later, recollections preserve a world where information moves through overlapping networks of servants and courtiers. Yet the path from whispered observation to written report can distort a story at every step. You understand how easily someone says the Queen ate little, another concludes she is ill by tomorrow. Perhaps half the palace believes she is dying. Meanwhile, Elizabeth may simply have disliked the fish. You smile and keep scrubbing. Eventually, the largest hearth is allowed to decline. This requires care. You do not simply walk away from a room full of burning timber. Useful embers may be managed according to the needs of the household. Ash is controlled. Dangerous sparks are checked. Some fires may need to remain available for specific purposes, while others can be reduced significantly. The kitchen slowly darkens. Without the highest flames, the stone walls seem to retreat into shadow. Heat still radiates from the hearth. You feel it against your face as you make one last inspection. A pot is moved. A tool is returned. A cloth hangs drying. Tomorrow's first wood waits nearby. Preparations for morning have already begun. That may be the cruelest little joke of the working day. You finish tonight by arranging the things you will need when darkness turns into morning. The palace never truly reaches an ending. It reaches pauses. You step back from the hearth for the first time. Nobody immediately calls your name. The silence feels enormous. Above you, Elizabeth's court is settling. Candles are being extinguished in chambers. Doors close. Guards remain at their posts. Servants whisper in corridors. Somewhere the Queen prepares for sleep beneath layers of security, ceremony, and attention. Down here. The last glow turns slowly red. You look at the kitchen that seemed violent with activity before dawn. Now it is almost peaceful. Ash, iron, stone, the faint smell of roasted meat, a trace of spice, and the quiet evidence of hundreds of meals. One final day has passed through the royal kitchen. Soon, when even these remaining sounds fade, you will finally understand what survives after all the spectacle disappears. Not the sugar castles, not the polished silver, not even the Queen's untouched dishes. What remains is the labour that made the court possible, and in the cooling darkness, that truth becomes easier to see. You remain beside the cooling hearth for another moment. The kitchen feels larger now, without servants crossing between tables, without spits turning and knives striking boards. The room reveals its actual shape. Stone walls rise into shadow. Iron hooks hang motionless. Copper vessels catch the last weak light. A thin red glow survives beneath grey ash. This morning, the same room seemed almost alive. Now it breathes slowly. You can finally hear small things. Wood settling, water dripping somewhere beyond the doorway, the faint scrape of a servant finishing one last task, a distant footstep overhead, perhaps a guard, perhaps an attendant, perhaps someone important enough to have spent the entire day without carrying a single bucket. You smile at that. Your hands smell faintly of smoke even after washing. The scent will follow you into sleep, and tomorrow it will return before you have time to miss it. You think back to the first fire. It began in darkness, before Elizabeth appeared publicly, before ambassadors exchanged careful words, before courtiers competed for attention. The royal household already depended upon people like you. That is easy to overlook. History remembers queens. It remembers battles. It remembers proclamations and rebellions. It remembers the Armada. It remembers portraits of Elizabeth standing beneath pearls and jewels, her clothing spreading around her like architecture. It rarely remembers who prepared her broth. Yet the magnificent court cannot exist without ordinary labour. Someone raises the animals. Someone catches the fish. Someone grows the grain. Someone drives the cart. Someone unloads the barrel. Someone splits the wood. Someone carries water. Someone sharpens the knife. And eventually someone stands in front of the fire and cooks. You are one person inside a chain extending across England and much farther. The pepper in your kitchen began thousands of miles away. Sugar arrived through expanding systems of commerce whose human costs are largely invisible from the palace. Wine crossed water. Fish came from rivers, ponds, and seas. Venison connected the table to aristocratic estates and hunting privilege. Fine wheat bread required land, labour, milling, transport, and careful baking. Even the smallest royal meal contains geography. That may be what surprises you most. The Queen's table is a map. England lies across it. So does Europe. So do distant trading worlds Elizabeth will never see herself. And because the table gathers those things together, food becomes an expression of power. Elizabeth can command abundance. She can offer it to ambassadors. Reward favoured people with access to it. Turn it into ceremony. Turn sugar into heraldry. Turn dinner into diplomacy. You have watched all of this from the opposite direction, from below, from the smoke, from the place where magnificence begins as raw ingredients and aching muscles. There is another side to that abundance. The England outside the palace in the late 1590s has endured poor harvests, rising prices, poverty, and social strain. The contrast is difficult to ignore. A royal banquet can display extraordinary plenty while families elsewhere worry about the cost of grain. Those two realities exist at the same time. Neither cancels the other. The court represents wealth precisely because most people cannot live like this. You think about the sugar sculpture disappearing under candlelight. Beautiful for an hour, expensive for an hour, gone by morning. Perhaps that is royal magnificence in miniature. Power must keep performing itself. One feast is not enough. One gown is not enough. One procession is not enough. Tomorrow the silver must shine again. The table must fill again. The servants must move again. Royalty looks permanent only because thousands of temporary acts are repeated. Your cooking is one of them. You lower yourself onto the bench. No one objects. At last. Your feet throb gently. A blister has formed near one heel. There is a small cut on one finger. Nothing serious. Just the day's signature. If you had imagined royal cooking as a prestigious appointment involving occasional elegant sauces and personal compliments from Elizabeth, the fantasy is burned away rather thoroughly. You are skilled. Certainly. Your skill matters. But skill here means endurance as much as creativity. You must understand heat without thermometers, timing without digital clocks, freshness without refrigeration, quantities without electronic scales, recipes that assume you already know what your hands should do. You adapt to physicians, officers, suppliers, religious calendars, court schedules, and unexpected guests. Then you clean everything afterward. There is dignity in that competence, not glamorous dignity, something quieter. You know how to make a difficult system work. The Queen herself remains strangely distant despite having shaped your entire day. That distance is appropriate. A royal cook might spend his working life serving the monarch without enjoying intimate personal access to her. Later storytelling tends to pull servants closer to famous rulers because conversation makes a better scene. Reality usually preserves more hierarchy. Elizabeth does not need to walk into the kitchen, taste your sauce from the spoon, and declare you a genius. The household exists so that she does not have to. Your success is measured partly by invisibility. Food arrives. The mechanism disappears. What Elizabeth herself thinks of every dish tonight will never be preserved. Even surviving accounts cannot recover each preference. Rejected plate, altered recipe, or private appetite. They reveal structure with extraordinary richness while leaving countless individual moments silent. That silence has followed you through the day. You fill it cautiously, not with certainty, with the ordinary logic of work. A sauce burns if nobody watches it. A servant gets tired, a fish arrives late, a cook improvises, a hungry boy steals a glance at leftover pastry. Someone complains about smoke. Someone laughs. These things rarely deserve official ink. They are still history. You stand again. Time to leave. The last kitchen servant checks the hearth. The remaining glow is safe. You walk toward the doorway. Your steps sound different now that the room is empty. At the threshold. You turn once. Tomorrow, before dawn, the kitchen will begin again. For now, it sleeps, and so can you. The corridor beyond is dim. A candle guides you past stone walls. The palace around you seems almost impossibly quiet after the day's noise. You pass closed doors. Somewhere beyond them are people separated from you by rank, wealth, education, and privilege. Yet everyone inside these walls eventually reaches the same requirement: sleep. For a few hours, even hierarchy becomes quieter. You continue toward your bed. The candle flame moves gently as you walk. The day loosens its grip, and now your steps become slower. There is nowhere left to hurry. The fires are behind you, reduced to a soft warmth beneath ash, and the smells of pepper, bread, smoke, fruit, and roasted meat begin to fade into the deeper coolness of the sleeping palace. You have carried enough today. Enough wood, enough water, enough dishes, enough responsibility. You can put all of it down. The queen is safe within her chambers. The guards remain awake. The storerooms are closed. The knives are clean. Tomorrow's wood is waiting. Nothing else needs your hands tonight. You reach the place where you sleep and settle into the darkness. Perhaps the bed is narrow. Perhaps another servant sleeps nearby. It does not matter much now. Your body understands rest before your mind does. Your shoulders soften. Your hands become still. The ache in your feet seems farther away. Outside, England stretches beyond the palace walls beneath the same night. Fields lie dark, roads are eddying, rivers continue moving quietly toward the sea. Somewhere cattle sleep. Somewhere grain waits inside a barn. Somewhere a fisherman prepares for another early morning. All those distant lives will begin feeding the palace again soon enough. But not yet. For these few quiet hours, the machinery can wait. And perhaps that is the gentlest truth to carry away from Elizabeth's kitchen. History is built not only by the people whose faces survive in portraits. It is built by hands, tired hands, skilled hands, hands that knead bread, sharpen knives, carry water, turn roasting spits, wash pots, and finally become still when the work is done. Your hands are still now. The palace grows softer around you. The last imagined candle dims. The kitchen disappears into darkness. And somewhere far behind you, beneath a thin blanket of ash, one tiny ember gives its final red glow before the night becomes completely quiet. Sweet dreams.